with attacks on Jews or extermination or getting people off the land. That's not, to my understanding, of what people are talking about. I think what has to happen is people need to realize that whatever happens, there should be equality between Israelis and Palestinians. And whether that's one person, one vote, or a confederation in which there's an Israel and a Palestine existing across the land, like, that is not, we don't have room for that discussion now. But I think the idea that from the river to the sea is inherently anti-Semitic, I very much disagree with that.
All right, we want to remind people we're looking at the screen right now. We have, of course, these are the protesters who have been detained this morning. They have zip ties on, and that line has just been growing longer and longer. They are supposedly being loaded onto the sheriff's buses that are just in front of them. We've not actually seen any of those being detained put on the buses yet, but they've been lining them up and putting zip ties on protesters since the wee hours of the morning this morning.
We want to bring in the public information officer from the CHP who is assisting in this task force at UCLA, Luis Quintero, who is on the campus right now. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a busy morning. Tell us about the operation today. From what we've been seeing, it's been largely peaceful.
Yes, we've been seeing a little bit of everything. We deployed our units after being requested from assistance from the UCLA Police Department. We've managed to clear out most of the protesters. However, we're still here on scene on campus and still dealing with a few demonstrators at this time.
And what is the plan for those who have been detained?
So at this time, I don't have an exact number, but over 100 demonstrators have been detained. They will be processed and booked. Like you mentioned, they are being loaded up into a bus at this time, where they will be transported to a local jail.
So what exactly were you instructed to do as an agency when you got word that you would be moving onto the campus?
So as soon as we received, we were requested for assistance, we started deploying our units. We deployed our units early morning yesterday, and we've been working all day, all night, trying to assist UCLA Police Department with removing the demonstrators.
And have you seen any violence? Have your officers encountered any violence or pushback?
We did. We're still actually receiving some pushback. However, earlier today, we were seeing demonstrators that get a little hostile with our officers. As soon as we showed up, they started getting a little rowdy. We were encountering some objects being thrown at our officers. However, we were able to manage and get most of the demonstrators at this time out of the area.
And tactically, what is the operation? What is the strategy here? Because we've just been seeing on our screen what's happening from the cameras on the ground. We saw long lines of officers kind of stepping in slowly and surrounding the encampment. Is that kind of the strategy that you're employing?
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing at this time. We're trying to get pushing the demonstrators back. We've managed to dismantle the encampment where they had their tents set up. We're still receiving a little bit of pushback. However, the goal is to try to get the campus completely cleared. And
sure, we've been hearing flashbangs all morning. One of the tactics, of course, to try to get this all under control and break up this encampment. We talked earlier about the LAPD and how they prep for situations like this, where they're facing hundreds or maybe even 1,000 protesters. What kind of training does CHP do to prepare for a situation like this? What are you telling officers as they go out and encounter these protesters?
So the California Highway Patrol, we're trained for incidents like these. In this case, we went ahead and...
Okay, I'm sorry. We are going to get to Cara Finstrom on the ground right now because it looks like things are getting a little chaotic. Cara, what are you seeing?
Yeah, we just had a couple of very loud flashbangs, and you can see one person is being detained. There was a scuffle here between officers and some of these protesters. We just walked up and heard the loud flashbang, so started moving in this direction and kind of just walked upon this. A number of officers here as well. You could see someone there on the ground.
Are you showing this live?
What happened here?
The Zionist gangs yesterday were torturing us for hours and they didn't show up. I called 911 twice and they hang up on me. Today they show up to arrest students who are protesting in front of us.
They start attacking the students who are peacefully protesting, running them down, and then hitting them with batons. Over there, they were holding guns at us at nighttime. When the cameras show up, they hide the guns. And so right now, they're just creating chaos as we're protesting. We are hands up.
So again, you're seeing some of the clashes, hearing some of the very loud flash bangs as officers are clearing. This is a force with the CHP, the area here. And you can see some of these protesters moving birds into the street, trying to create some obstruction for the officers as they move out.
Cara, are you seeing
there is a...
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say there is a bus at the end of this street. These officers clearing the birds out of the street. I don't know. Looks like they're moving the bus up now into the street. Or maybe they're going to turn it around down there. So don't know if they actually detained anyone other than the one person we saw on the ground, and I'm not sure where he went. They put him into zip ties, and he is now no longer here. I don't know if they took him into one of the patrol cars because we got turned around. But there's another group over here that you can see with bullhorns, a group of protesters that has not left. This is very different than what I saw on the other side of campus earlier this morning. They pushed a group very peacefully off of campus that just continued to chant and kind of move back and left off of Charles E. Young Street. Everyone just got into their cars and left. This is another group that is staying. And you can hear many of them on their bullhorns, clapping, chanting. A little further down, Victor, if you can pan to your left, you can also see a line of officers down there. Not sure what is directly in front of them. But the officers behind me here have cleared all those lifts out of the road. And it looks like they're just really trying to kind of secure the area at this point.
Yeah, we heard those bangs behind you. We saw that even it startled you there on the ground. Are you seeing pepper spray or anything like that?
They were very loud. I mean, they were immediately where we were.
Yeah, we saw that, and you can see how it would be very, very startling to anyone there on the ground. It still looks peaceful. We are looking at another camera shot also on the right-hand side where people are sitting. They're zip-tied. It looks like no one's really pushing back, but a very different scene on the left-hand side of your screen where Tina is right now. You talked to a couple of the people who are involved just now, basically expressing frustration, saying where were the police when people were coming in from the outside to the camp and the violence was happening earlier in the week, but now we're peacefully demonstrating and they're dispersing us. But of course, there was an order for an unlawful assembly declared. They were given a deadline to leave and did not leave. So now this is what's happening there. But it's definitely unfolding in a different way right now, Cara.
It is, and further down the street here, you can see one person in zip ties on his wrist there. An officer speaking with him. I'm not sure where they are taking the folks that are being detained here. That's the second person that we've seen with a zip tie on. Everyone else seems to be standing back. They've moved closer to the building. And the officers kind of just surrounding them, but it seems to have calmed down. I don't know what we walked up upon, because as soon as we arrived, pulled up, and got onto campus, we started hearing those very loud, flashbangs, and we kind of rushed to this area and caught it in the midst of kind of a scuffle, a little bit of an altercation, and then we saw one person being taken to the ground, the zip ties put on. And now we can also see a second person being escorted away in a zip tie. But those are the only two that I personally have seen, because again, this morning for about 2 hours, we were on the opposite side of campus where people were pushed back in a very peaceful, slow, methodical way. Very different group.
Yeah, and a very different scene than what we saw earlier in the week when the violence actually did break out. The Jewish Federation of Los Angeles actually put out a statement about what happened on Tuesday, saying, quote, "The abhorrent actions of a few counter-protesters last night do not represent the Jewish community or our values," called for open discussion and peaceful protests. So we should mention that as well, because it does sound, as it becomes clearer, Sandy mentioned earlier the fog of protest, but as it becomes clearer, it does look like an outside group came onto campus to disrupt that camp, and that's when the violence broke out. Certainly.
We should also say Cara's been saying she sees them being detained, only a couple of people, but can't see where they're going. On your right-hand side of the screen is where those protesters are being lined up. They're sitting right on the curb there waiting to get into the sheriff's buses. As we spoke with the CHP just a minute ago, says that more than 100 people have been detained. They will be processed and booked. On the left-hand side of your screen, we are watching the scene where Cara is, where we just heard multiple flashbangs and saw one person being detained. And then on the right-hand side of your screen is where they're taking the folks who are being detained. And Cara, you have spoken with several protesters this morning. I remember you had a young guy earlier who recently graduated from the university, and then you had the two gentlemen you just spoke to. From all those protesters, it seems they're very critical of the law enforcement response, which everyone is kind of criticizing after the violence on Tuesday night when law enforcement was not present. Kind of recap what you've been hearing from these protesters.
You know, we've heard the full gamut. I've heard from students who wanted the police to be out here, a stronger presence sooner. Students who were concerned about taking midterms and studying and felt they couldn't get to where they needed to on campus. They were frightened. All the way through pro-Palestinian protesters who felt that they were being unfairly singled out after counter-protesters, they said, stirred up violence on campus. So a lot of criticism. It probably is difficult to strike the right note with everyone here, but we've seen a variance of responses as well from police. Again, from the very orderly, kind of quiet, over an hour and a half, pushing back a crowd about 1,000 feet to what we just saw behind us. So they're dealing with a lot of variables. If we flip our camera all the way around, here comes another group of officers in riot gear. You can see the zip ties that they're carrying. Unclear how many people, I know you said you could see them being kind of lined up in another part of campus, have actually been detained here on campus. We've been able to move around much more freely at this point, now that they feel they have the campus somewhat secure. When we first arrived here, right around 3 o'clock this morning, media had a hard time getting onto this campus. They tried to completely, close off all of the exits and entrances onto campus, I'm sure so that they had a static situation. But we have been able to move around much more freely since then. And the crowd has diminished greatly. But there are these pockets of people who are remaining on campus, and this is where we see some of these confrontations now occurring, like the one we just witnessed.
Okay, Cara, we're going to keep watching your camera. I want to bring back in journalism professor at USC, Sandy Tolan. When you hear about the media being kept out of these protests, and I know there were similar complaints at USC, but also we know that at least 2 student journalists earlier when this violence broke out at UCLA on the campus were hurt, significantly hurt. There were about 25 people hurt, according to the pro-Palestinian camp there. What do you make of that? You're a journalism professor. What do you make of keeping the media out?
I think it's a terrible idea. I mean, this is what you see in countries that impose martial law. I mean, the idea that the press should not witness what is going on, to me, in a free society, at a university, which is supposed to be fostering free speech, shutting out the media, shutting out KCAL, shutting out the LA Times, other stations, other newspapers, what is the concern? That people will witness what is happening? I mean, I don't know what else. I mean, if people want to restrict it to only the press, I wouldn't be in favor of that, but I would understand that. But shutting out the press entirely. Yesterday we had 400 faculty, or well, a couple hundred faculty at least, I would say, protesting the militarization of campus and the arrests and calling for the charges to be dropped. And we had to march all the way to the gate at Jefferson, which looked like it was closed, so there were bars, and people were professors were talking to the media through the locked gates because they could not come on. So And I also like to give a shout out to student journalists all across the country. Our Annenberg Media and the Daily Trojan have been doing remarkable reporting, and talk about a learning environment. These young journalists are doing work they'll never forget. And that it's really important to the community now, to all of Los Angeles, because the decisions, which I think are very, very ill-advised decisions, to shut out the free press. What is going on here?
They have been the eyes and ears on the ground. The UC system, the policy is you bring in police and law enforcement as a last resort. And maybe they saw the violence that broke out earlier in the week, and they said, we have no choice to keep our campus safe and our community safe. We need to bring in law enforcement. What would you make of that?
Well, you know, again, fog of protests, so that caveat. But what it appears happened, and I hear the statement from the Jewish Federation that there may be just some people who weren't representative, but there was violence, there was mob violence against the pro-Palestinian protesters who have been peaceful. Now, by many accounts, including professors, police stood by while this was happening. I don't recall if it was campus police or not, but they stood by, and people in the pro-Palestinian camp said, you know, they needed help. So they didn't get that help, and so there was this mob violence. And then after that, the university calls in the LAPD and other law enforcement officers. So it's almost as if that violence on Tuesday night is being rewarded by taking down the camp. And the camp and the camp at USC, by all accounts, and I've been to the USC camp, you know, probably 8 or 10 hours, has been peaceful. So it's almost like you want people to protest peacefully, and then the violence is put on them, and then the camp is broken down. I don't follow the logic there.
Are you worried about the students involved in this? Because UCLA has said that employees and students involved could face sanctions, even suspension in some cases. How do you feel about students who want to exercise their free speech, peacefully protest, but then are they putting their education and future at jeopardy?
I mean, USC's administration is putting their education and future at jeopardy. They are courageous people, and you know, again, I have not witnessed any of those people in all the hours I've spent at the camp speak in a way that is anti-Semitic. And again, there are many Jewish students who are part of these protests. They have a lot of risk. They have, because of the courage of their convictions, they have risked, and think about this throughout history, you know, Gandhi, Mandela, King. I'm not saying that these students are the equivalent, but people have spoken out, spoken their convictions, and risked arrest. I have a colleague who is not tenured. Other professors were arrested, they're not tenured. They're risking a lot. And I think if USC and if other institutions want to, you know, appropriately reach out an olive branch, it would be to drop all charges and promise that there will be no sanctions, because at the very least, that is something that administrators can do.
And in Columbia, they're actually risking expulsion. We want to go to Mark Liu now. You know this campus very well, Mark. Talk about what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, so what I've been doing is gathering information from the radio traffic and phone calls about what we just saw in Cara Finstrom's live shot. That group of protesters that appeared to be out in the street right near where Cara was, and we saw those CHP officers end up aggressively taking down at least one protester and taking that person into custody. This was the group that I believe was attempting to approach protesters that were already in custody to the north of Royce Quad. Now, if you come out to my screen, I'm going to show you on the map where this all went down, because this appeared to be the area where at least 150 protesters had been taken to. So originally this morning, the Royce Quad here, this is where the encampment was cleared. We saw with Rick Montanez's live shot a little bit earlier that protesters were taken up this street here and then around the corner somewhere here. This is Bunch Hall. I've heard multiple references to Bunch Hall this morning as officers were talking about protesters that were being processed in that area. Now, just about 30 minutes ago, we heard that there was a new group of protesters that was walking towards this area here, and that CHP had formed a line along with LA County sheriffs. Now, Cara Finstrom, in her live shot, was right here on this street, right next to a place called Louval Commons, and was looking this way, and this is where we saw that confrontation right there. Now, very likely this is because over in this area, buses are being loaded up with what they're called misdemeanor offenders. I just heard on the UCPD frequency that the second bus that is entirely full of misdemeanor offenders is actually leaving the campus right now. It's heading up this way, possibly towards what they are saying is either the MDT, the Metropolitan Detention Center downtown, or Twin Towers, which is over 20 miles away by Union Station. This is the LA Sheriff's Intake Center. So the question that I had for law enforcement all morning was where and what is going to happen to these protesters that have been zip-tied and taken away. Are they going to be processed at UCLA, cited and released? It looks like, Rudabeh and Sheba, they are going to be loaded on buses and taken at least about 20 miles away to the downtown area, where they will be processed at either an LAPD facility or an LA Sheriff's facility for misdemeanor charges. So this is not a cite and release operation that's taking place at UCLA today. There are over 100, possibly 150 young people, students, or people not affiliated with the campus that have been taken into custody. It sounds like they're being charged with misdemeanors.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when this is finally cleared, if more people, protesters, students, people from the outside come in and kind of take their place and return to the campus. We know if you're just waking up, you'd like to get a look at weather and traffic, so we are going to show that on one side of the screen so that you can get to work on time and plan out your day as we continue our live coverage of the protests at UCLA that have been disbanded by a task force, including the LAPD, the California Highway Patrol, the UCLA campus police force. They have been zip tying protesters, about 100 of them, or up to 150, as Mark just reported, putting them on buses and taking them off campus, essentially breaking up this pro-Palestinian encampment that has been going on. They did not heed the deadline after an unlawful assembly was declared, and they continued to stay at their encampment until this morning. And this has been going on now for what, 3 hours?
Yeah, about 3 hours. And this is really the culmination of a week-long of events. This encampment, went up about a week ago. On Tuesday is when we saw those peaceful pro-Palestinian protesters being confronted and attacked by counter-protesters, law enforcement being heavily criticized for not stepping in for the 2 to 3 hours that violence was taking place. Then we saw yesterday afternoon that unlawful assembly order being issued. And now this morning, this is when law enforcement is moving in to clear that out. And we have been watching this for several hours. There were some moments that seemed very chaotic. We saw just a moment ago our car Finstrom in the center where law enforcement was confronting some of the protesters. Several flashbangs went off. We saw another person being detained. And again, we've seen about 150 people being detained this morning. Other than that, though, it actually has been very peaceful. The CHP public information officer we spoke with earlier said, vocally there were some protesters, of course, who had things to say and push back, but really no fighting or violence in any of this morning.
Yeah, I want to bring in again USC Professor Sandy Tolan, who spent many years in the UC system at Berkeley. So UCLA taking a very different stance than the other UC campuses. We have Riverside, Berkeley, a few of the other campuses, well, many of the other campuses where similar protests have been happening. However, they haven't seen the violence that we saw at UCLA earlier in the week. What do you make of UCLA's stance, taking a very different stance than the rest of the UC system?
Well, again, I'm confused. The violence, as reported on Tuesday night, was against people against the Palestinian
But does
protesters.
it matter who's causing it if people on campus are at risk, no matter who instigates it?
That's a good point. But at the same time, why was there no intervention to quell that violence? Why did officers, by many first-hand eyewitness accounts, stand by while this violence was being perpetrated and then shut down the protest camp? There's a disconnect there. I think hopefully there'll be, some post-mortem on what the decision-making was. Listen, I totally understand, and again, I don't wish I was a college administrator right now.
And of course, we want to get to our Tina Patel. She looks like she's with law enforcement right now. Tina?
And part of the group that was helping clear this encampment earlier this morning. You said you were brought in by UCLA specifically to help clear the encampment. From your perspective, how did that process go?
Yes, UCLA Police Department requested our assistance, and the goal was to clear the encampment of protesters. As you can see, the encampment has been cleared, and the operation went well. We did take items were thrown at our officers, fire extinguishers, smoke. However, the encampment was cleared in approximately 3 hours.
You know, we heard the dispersal notice earlier in the evening yesterday. Why did it take so long for your officers to move in, and why do it in the middle of the night? When we were watching, it seemed like because of all the equipment here, and I mean, we can look behind you, there's tables, there's chairs, there's tents. It felt like it made it a little bit harder for everybody to navigate in this small area.
Yeah, it takes time to coordinate a big operation, and where we brought in more than 250 CHP officers from throughout Southern California. So it takes time to coordinate. I can't go into details as far as the tactics or the planning, but the lapse was, or the delay was because it takes time. And a lot of planning. And
you said for the most part, the encampment has been cleared out. People were taken away. And you were saying that now it's kind of another agency that will separate who was a student, who was an outsider. That you just wanted to get everyone out of this area.
That's correct. Our job was simply to clear out the area. We turn them over to UCLA Police Department, and they'll determine what charges they'll face, if any.
We see that the encampment itself is clear, but there are a number of people still here on campus. On the other side of this fountain, we see a number of protesters that have gathered on Jan's steps. You have a number of CHP kind of here. What is going to happen now?
We are working with the protesters to ensure that they peacefully surrender or leave the premise. If they don't, a dispersal order was given again. If they don't, then they'll be arrested.
And again, you were saying that you were brought in along with law enforcement agencies, but there's about 250 CHP officers right now on campus.
There's approximately 250 CHP officers. However, at Los Angeles Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, we all collaborated and worked together to assist UCLA Police Department.
All right, and no one was injured on your force this morning?
Correct.
Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. Again, the sergeant was saying that there's a lot he can't say as far as tactics. There are still a large law enforcement presence. Right behind me, you can see CHP kind of lined up, keeping an eye on the protesters on this side. We asked at some point, might you go and start clearing these people out? And he didn't want to go into any specifics about what they're going to do. Right now, they are kind of keeping their distance, just watching this situation unfold. We'll continue to stay here on campus and watch it along with you and let you know when there are any updates. Right now, we'll send it back to you.
Tina, thank you. Let's get to Rick Montanez now, who is also on campus in a different area. Very different scene for you there, Rick. What are you seeing?
So right now we are just adjacent to where that encampment was, but what we want to show you first is what we've been watching this morning, and you've seen a lot of the video from our camera here, where they are loading the people who are under arrest, we believe at least detained, with zip ties. They're being held and they're loaded onto these buses, but these LA County Sheriff's Department buses, typically what we see them transport inmates in. So we've also been hearing a lot of the protesters cheering for other protesters as they're walked onto the bus. You know, we heard from Cara earlier about that incident with the flashbangs. We could certainly hear that from here. And then we saw a group of people walked over to this area. And then, of course, more cheering from these protesters. It's interesting, though, also to see and witness these protesters. Some of them, while they were in line earlier, were even laughing with some of these officers. Some of them, of course, very upset. You know, we're hearing, as we've been talking all morning, about the criticism of law enforcement. So we even, as we arrived on campus this morning, we heard from some of the protesters who had walked by, and they were trying to direct us where to go because they said they didn't see too many cameras in a certain part of campus. So they wanted to make sure that we were out there to document what was happening to them and this large law enforcement response that they are very critical of. But again, right now we're seeing these people loaded onto buses. But there's another thing we want to show you too, that is where that encampment was, because it is now there's a lot of stuff there, but it is empty of any protesters. So if Joe Ruiz would show us down here, you see that is where the encampment was. But just beyond that is what I want to point out. That is Royce Hall. And notice all of the graffiti that we see on the walls there, on the pillars. There is, of course, there's signs taped up there, but we're noticing a lot of graffiti as well. And that's something that even, you know, we were talking earlier about these student reporters. We talked with a few from the Daily Bruin who declined an interview, but they've been out here working as well, documenting a lot of that. And so some of this that we have seen in the beginning stages of have come from those student journalists. And then now, as the crowd has cleared out, as law enforcement has cleared out from the grass here, because if you remember in our reporting earlier, we saw a lot of police officers in tactical gear. They were even here keeping us back. But now that they've moved out and, we're starting to see a little bit more of order on campus and a little bit more freedom for us, we're starting to notice a lot of that vandalism there outside of Royce Hall. So that's going to be a lot to clean up. And then you see all of the trash, the tarps, the tents, everything here in the encampment area that has been set up for a week now. But it looks like everyone who was protesting, who was demonstrating in that encampment is now out of it. And then so we have, if we can swing back around one more time, Joe, to show again just the law enforcement presence and the fact that we have all of these people who are being detained. As we heard from interviews that we did with law enforcement earlier, the fact that over 100 people detained this morning. We even saw CHP loading up canisters into a pickup truck that we are told, are munitions. So that could be anything from less than lethal beanbags, all the way to tear gas, depending on what they have ready for them. But still a large presence out here this morning, just adjacent to where that encampment was cleared out. So a lot of chaotic hours out here this morning. There's a lot to clean up, and we're still keeping an eye as they appear to be bringing more of these arrested protesters here to be loaded onto the buses and likely booked and taken off to jail. Exactly where, we're not sure yet, but that's all we're trying to figure out right now.
All right, Rick, thank you for that. We do want to say goodbye to our viewers on CBS Los Angeles Channel 2 right now, but do stay with us here on KCAL News Channel 9. We are continuing our coverage of the campus protest. This is at UCLA, where for the last several hours, a big law enforcement task force has moved into the campus to disperse the pro-Palestinian encampment and arrest more than 100 people who are now being booked. You're looking at live pictures of these protesters being led away in zip ties, put onto buses where they will be taken to be processed and booked and then put in jail likely until they can get back out. So it remains to be seen what will happen on campus after now that this encampment has been broken up. I want to bring in again USC professor Sandy Tolan and just the contrast here with what happened at UCLA versus what's been happening at USC, where you work right now, and also drawing on your experience in the UC system. We have protests at UC Irvine, at Berkeley, at Riverside. None of them have looked like this.
Yes, and it's not clear. It's too early to say why these decisions to bring in the police from outside and in a pretty much of a militarized police force, both at USC and UCLA. What was the reason for that? We know at USC that there are deep ties to LAPD, and LAPD itself has deep ties to some people from LAPD have trained in Israel. So I think there's a bit of a conflict of interest in calling, at least at USC, in calling people in. But one of the things, Rudape, I want to point out is that these, at least at USC, because I've spent the most time there, of course, these are really very, very well organized, very deliberate communities. There are medical tents, there are food tents, there's community rules, very elaborate community rules posted. These young people have created communities in a very short time, and in a way they're learning how to be serious, engaged citizens. So I don't know why USC and now UCLA have chosen this route, talking with the students, engaging with them, figuring out what their demands are, and having discussions with them, as happened during the anti-apartheid protests so many years ago, would have been a much better option than bringing in, riot police.
I want to bring in my co-anchor now, Jamie Yukas. You've been watching all of this as well. And we have been talking about what the goal of these, the message of the protesters has been, which is kind of getting lost in all of this.
Well, I think it's also interesting, since we have the professor here, activism is usually, it's not only welcome on college campuses, it's often encouraged on on college campuses. Is that something that we need to put in perspective here as we're looking at these protests across the country?
It's not clear to me why the response is so different. I think one of the reasons is that the speech that is being, some people are interpreting some of the speech as anti-Semitic. I have not witnessed that myself, and as we discussed before, I don't believe that "From the River to the Sea" is inherently an anti-Semitic slogan. But I think the fact that people are calling on Americans and on citizens to look at what's actually happening in Gaza. 35,000 dead, more than 1 million displaced, 14,000 children killed. 35,000 dead is almost the population of Culver City.
Did you say 35,000? It's actually the undergraduate population of UCLA.
Right, and that's how many people have died in Gaza. 70% of them, by estimates, are women and children. So I think that people that are in these protest camps are trying to call attention to this, trying to link, as people did during the anti-apartheid protests, the investments and ask for divestment, and at least have a conversation in which this can be discussed as adults. These are young adults who are learning how to be conscious, engaged citizens, and they should not be rewarded, quote unquote, with arrest.
You're putting yourself at a little bit of risk, aren't you, by going into the camp and by speaking out against your own university in some cases?
Well, I mean, I believe in free speech. I believe that I also am grateful that I have tenure at USC. I know some of my untenured colleagues have actually risked arrest themselves and been arrested, and I'm very concerned about them, and I want my university to come out and say that the students will not be punished with expulsion or suspension, and that the charges will be dropped, and also against my colleagues who have followed the courage of their convictions and gotten arrested. I've been covering Israel, Palestine, the Holy Land for almost half my life. And I've seen so many things, and I have so many friends in Israel and in Gaza and the West Bank. Israel, Palestine has been the work of my life to a large extent. So I just feel compelled to say what I know and to try to do it in a way that's compassionate and reasonable so people can understand really what's at stake here.
Well, we appreciate you being here with us. We want to bring in Tina Patel now. She is on the campus at UCLA. I'm sorry, Cara Finstrom, who is at UCLA. And Cara, we saw some pretty chaotic activity behind you earlier.
Yeah, it's calmed down right where we are at this point, but take a look. This is what's happening here right now. There's a small group of students. You can see them sitting up on the steps there, and they have just kind of hunched down and taken a seat there, and there is a group of CHP officers here just standing by. So very quiet. And if we pan our camera all the way around, you can see another group of CHP officers a little further down the block. They appear to be regrouping. But let's give you a look at some video shot a short while ago when we first arrived. We moved from one campus end to the other, and as we walked onto campus, we heard some loud flashbangs.
In my time at UCLA, I've never seen a movement like this. There just came a point today where I was watching all of the horrific stories from last night, the beatings, the flash bombs, everything going on, and it was just enough. And so I started out just buying supplies for the group, and I just ended up staying because it was such a powerful and beautiful movement that's going on. So I'm really happy that I've stayed here. There's been absolutely no violence from any of the protesters. They have kept their hands off the officers to everything I have seen. The officers have pushed back and pushed through the encampment using tear gas, using flash bombs. As far as
Hey, will you make a path right here? Please make a path. Hold. Please make a path. Thank you. Right here.
Okay, I know we played some sound that we actually got from the other end of campus. We also had some flash bangs that went off here. we've spoken with a variety of students out here this morning. Some of the students who actually hadn't made their way off campus yet, very concerned about safety, very concerned about being able to continue with their studies and wanting all of this cleared. But most of the folks, obviously, that we've met on campus have been involved with these protests, and some of them very upset about being pushed off of campus. The beginning of our day was about an hour and a half, 2 hours spent on the other side of campus where there was a very slow, methodical push off. We didn't see any scuffles or any interaction really between direct confrontation between officers and the students and protesters that were out here. Once we moved to this side, we did see a scuffle right once we arrived. We heard those loud flashbangs, and we saw 2 people be detained, 1 taken to the ground, and they were taken out of this area. So we're kind of standing by here at this point. We're going to wander a little bit further into campus, but it does seem that right now these officers are kind of zeroing in on pockets of students that have been left behind. From our vantage point, it looks like most of them have now been pushed off of campus. But these officers kind of just zeroing in on these areas where there are groups that are still here.
Yeah, you see some of the officers behind you even sitting down now at this point as things continue to kind of de-escalate here. Cara, thank you. We want to check in now with Tina Patel, who's over in the encampment area. What's the scene looking like where you are, Tina?
You know, I think similar to what Cara's experiences is what we are here. There are CHP here. They're kind of watching a group of protesters by Jan's steps. Because of the vantage point, because those are steps that go down, we can't actually tell how many people there are, but it doesn't feel like there's as big a crowd as there was earlier. And even though there's a few people with loudspeakers, there was a lot of chanting, even playing of music earlier, and it doesn't feel like it is as big a group here as it used to be. But you can see CHP is here. They are kind of standing by in case they need to clear this area. Now, I'm going to have Sparkle, my photographer, spin around because this is the encampment that we've been keeping an eye on for the last week. And in the early morning hours, CHP did come through here and actually clear everyone out. They said there was about 130 people that they arrested. They had tried to tell them to disperse on their own, ask them to leave on their own. When they didn't, they kind of came through the camp and started detaining people and taking them away. We have an interview that we were able to do with one person as she was being led away. Listen to what she said about this whole situation. So again, there was students here in the encampment, and they were given the dispersal order last night. They were told that this was an unlawful gathering, that if they did not leave, they would face arrest, and that students could even face suspension or expulsion. Students that we talked to this morning said that they were here on principle. They believe they have the right to gather here on campus and that they were not going to leave. But then in the early morning hours, law enforcement did start to come through the encampment. They started to clear away all of these tents, all of these chairs and tables that you see here. And then law enforcement did start to take one by one the students out. Some of them students, some of them may have been supporters. It was kind of hard to tell exactly the crowd that was in here. They seemed prepared for that action. They were linked with arms. They had masks and they had goggles kind of to protect themselves in case anything happened. We talked to CHP earlier this morning, and they tell us that in the beginning there was some resistance. Some things were thrown, a fire extinguisher, but they didn't see anybody injured. They say none of their officers were injured. Eventually, they were able to get everyone out of the encampment area. They say there are a few stragglers that they're still dealing with, but for the most part, they feel like they were able to do what they were brought in to do. Again, CHP brought in by UCLA police kind of as a backup. There's also LAPD here. There's the sheriff's department. And again, as we look over here at Jan's steps, we kind of see that they are keeping an eye on the protesters that have gathered outside of the encampment, making sure that nothing has happened there. They tell us they have given those protesters a dispersal order, told them to leave, but right now they're just kind of standing and watching.
You know, Tina, before we let you go, I find it somewhat fascinating for myself because we haven't been able to see inside the encampment. You know, from all the reporting that you've been doing over the last week or so, you know, is there any takeaways for you now being able to be inside? We know Professor Tolan was saying there are organization to this in the encampment and things like that. Can you just give us from your perspective from being on the outside to now inside?
Yeah, Jamie, I mean, I think the thing that I notice a lot is just the organization. I mean, just right in the area where we are, which is by the one end where there's a fountain, you can kind of see on the ground all of the bottles of water, the paper towels, the coolers. These students, I can't say that they were all students, but they seemed like they were organized. They had kind of prepared to be here. It looked like they were preparing to be here for the long haul, that they were going to be here for several more days or weeks. They had kind of a community almost built in this area. And so when they, even though they knew that they could be pushed out, they still were planning to stay. And that's why we see kind of all of these, the remnants of what had been kind of a community.
Yeah, the coolers, the food, it's very interesting. Tina, thank you so much. We appreciate your reporting. We now want to head to Rick Montanez and a different part of the campus. Rick, what are you seeing?
Well, Jamie, right now we just have with us Luis Quintero, one of the public information officers for the Highway Patrol. We know that they've been very busy for hours. You're part of a task force, so I'm sure there's a lot of work in gathering the information, but you and I were just talking about the fact that there is still some resistance happening on campus. There's still action going on?
Yes, at this point we've removed most of the protesters. However, we are still seeing the resistance on the far end to my right. Our officers are on standby, hoping that these protesters just kind of make their way out of the campus.
And I know already you had rough estimates of how many people have been arrested or detained. We have the buses where a lot of them are being loaded on just behind us here. Is there any better idea of how many people have been taken into custody?
At this point, 132 protesters were taken into custody.
And do we know how many people have been on campus? I mean, have 132 taken into custody? Did a lot of people get walked off campus? Or, you know, we saw the skirmish lines from law enforcement. I know a lot of them are different agencies. I saw LAPD, the Sheriff's Department. Were there more people that just kind of left or were maybe forced off campus?
We did begin seeing people walk away from campus. So as they saw these people being arrested and putting into these buses, we started seeing people kind of just leave the campus.
So we also saw one thing that we noticed where people getting loaded onto the buses over here. There were officers with a lot of them. It looked like almost one officer per person who was detained, and then they had like a brown bag. Was that for like personal effects, or do you have an idea of what that was?
We did assign an officer per person that was detained. It's for safety reasons. We're dealing with a large group here, and the bag is just either the officer's stuff or some of the protesters' property that was brought with them.
Okay, and the last thing I wanted to ask you about, we saw one of the pickup trucks, CHP pickup truck, and there was canisters, big gray canisters. Somebody said they may have been munitions or something like that. Can you talk about what was maybe in that?
It's some of the ammunitions. In this case, we deployed our special response team, which is specifically for incidents like these, and they do use different types of ammunitions. And in this case, you did hear the flashbangs, and that's kind of to get people, alerted that we're coming in and get them slightly distracted as well.
So you said the public information officers are now going back to the staging area just to kind of regroup this morning and then kind of figure out next steps?
Yes, we got to regroup, work on the logistics of everything, and see what we're going to do from here on out.
Okay, Officer Quintero, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Before I leave you, one thing we want to point out is, again, we're seeing a lot of the people who are detained, zip-tied, and taken to be loaded onto the buses here. We also have seen a lot of them and heard a lot of them chanting as they see other protesters brought over here. As we've talked all morning, we know that some of them are students, some of them may not be. It's difficult to tell and difficult to talk with a lot of them because we are kept kind of at a distance here. But we are, to kind of situate you, we are just down the way from where Tina and her photographer Sparkle are, right near the encampment. And so, just kind of watching to see what happens next. But as we just heard Officer Quintero explain, there is still some resistance by some groups here on campus. So not everything has been settled, but a lot has. So we'll keep an eye on things. And for now, I'm going to toss it back to you guys.
Okay, Rick, thank you. And please express our apologies to him for cutting him off on the phone earlier when things started to get a little crazy there. We appreciate his information. And
Let's go ahead and give people, I think, just a recap of what's happened if you're just tuning in this morning. At 6 o'clock last night, there was a dispersal order issued at UCLA around 2:45 in the morning, just before 3 o'clock. Roughly a 9-hour standoff ended up happening. That's when officers, they did what they call a kettle, where they try to get everybody kind of into a smaller space and push them away from the encampment. CHP, other law enforcement officers arrived in riot gear to do that. We've now learned about 132 protesters have been taken into custody. That's the latest number we just heard, but at least 250 CHP officers on site this morning, as well as other law enforcement. This is some video of around the time when that kettling started to happen and they started moving in that riot gear at that point in time. And now, as we've when we started reaching about the 6 o'clock hour, we noticed most of the people being detained, put on buses. This was at the height of everything. When you're looking at this video here, you can tell it is dark out, and around this morning, 4 a.m., officers then dismantled the eastern front of the encampment. At 5 a.m., police took control of the northern eastern sides of the encampment. Protesters began to move away, and as we just heard from that public information officer, other students then started leaving the area as well.
And then by about 4 a.m., officers had largely dismantled the eastern front of the encampment. Hundreds of protesters, however, still had formed a line with their arms linked. They were facing an equally long line of officers. Jamie just talked about the numbers there. By 4:45, police had successfully cleared the area, giving them control lines on both the north and eastern flanks of the encampment. And at that point, people began to leave the area voluntarily. However, a lot of the protesters were still there. Some were facing off with officers. Dozens more were arrested in zip ties. We saw Rick Montanez bring us the protesters being led away in zip ties and loaded onto buses. So that is kind of where we stand right now. This has been going on for hours now. We want to bring in Mark Liu. You went to UCLA. You know the campus. You also know all about the law enforcement response, Mark.
Yeah, that's right. So Jamie and Rudabeh, I've been monitoring the radio traffic from UCLA PD, LAPD, and other law enforcement, and I'll tell you some very good news. For the first time in hours, I'm actually hearing nothing. A lot less radio traffic. That's a good sign. But what you're looking at here is a map, and I'm going to break down how everything happened this morning. First, what we're looking at, the center of attention was Royce Quad. That's there in the center of campus. That's where the encampment was. Earlier this morning, as you had mentioned, LAPD and CHP, sheriffs and UCPD moved in from this staging area, went across and cleared out the protesters in this area. A lot of them went down the Jan steps here. This is back towards the residence halls. The residence halls are here to the west of campus. So we did see a lot of protesters leave in that direction. But as we know here, there was a lot of action in the middle of the Royce Quad as that encampment was dismantled. Now, what we're seeing right now, Tina Patel in her live shot, she's right here where the top of the Jan steps, there is a line of officers here and then another line of protesters that very likely came from the residence halls as the sun came up this morning. They came up the steps and are there now. She says there's not too many. Rick Montanez in his live shot is here. He was able to see many of the protesters come up this way and be taken to a staging area that I believe is somewhere up here. This is the Bunch Hall Sculpture Garden. It's a large open area. It would be a great place in order for the LAPD, the CHP, the sheriffs, in order to process everyone. It's surrounded by buildings. Now, about 20 minutes ago, her live shot was here. She was looking this way when she saw a large confrontation between about 100 protesters and a line of CHP officers and LA sheriff's officers that were guarding this area. They thought the protesters had come in from this direction again, very likely from the residence halls along this route. And they were peaceful, they were chanting, but then we saw with that video there was a scuffle. One person was taken into custody. This is all very likely because right around here, these protesters are being loaded onto buses on Charles E. Young Drive. We now know that the sheriffs and the LAPD say at least 2 buses filled with what they are calling as misdemeanor offenders are being taken probably to the north here towards the 405 to be taken to either the MDT, which is the Metropolitan Detention Center downtown, or Twin Towers Jail to be processed. Now, we had wondered whether or not these people that were being taken into custody would be cited and released at the campus, but it looks like they may end up being taken to jail. Don't know if they're going to be held all day, but they are going to make that 20-mile trip to downtown LA where they're going to be cited and processed there. What remains to be seen, what happens to them later. Now, the university has issued a statement about what happened here and also a warning to the students that were involved. I'm going to come out to my screen and show you. This was on Bruin Alert. It says avoid the area of Dixon Plaza. We know that was because the operation happening this morning. It was an unlawful assembly. The University of California declared the encampment unauthorized tents and structures to be unlawful. They required that everyone must leave the encampment. We know that happened this morning. But importantly, here, I'm going to look at this last paragraph. If you fail to leave and remain present in the encampment or unauthorized tents for any reason, for your purpose of remaining, you will be in violation of the law. It says for students, sanctions could include disciplinary measures such as interim suspension, and after proper due process, you could lead to dismissal. Faculty's members also could be facing disciplinary actions from their judiciary committees, and employees could face disciplinary actions through human resources. So everyone involved here, if they remained, especially students, could face suspension or expulsion in addition to the charges that they may face, misdemeanor charges for being there. We're not sure if it's trespass or disturbing the peace or what. But this is, both the university and police are, handling this in a way where they are enforcing the law regarding this unlawful encampment. So we do see, although, 2 full buses leaving the campus, though, with misdemeanor detainees.
All right, Mark, thank you for that. Appreciate it. I do find it interesting, too. I want to bring in USC journalism professor Sandy Tolan, who's been with us throughout the morning. I just alerted you, I got a news alert that the University of Minnesota has actually made a peaceful resolution where the interim president went to the pro-Palestinian group and was able to make an agreement, and they're just dispersing, in a normal fashion, not seeing this type of police presence play out. This can be done in a peaceful way.
I mean, here we have a very powerful example at a major American university that shows, as you say, this can be done. This could be done at USC. This could be done at UCLA, at Emory, at Columbia. Why is it not being done there? The reasons are complex. Obviously, there are numerous charges of anti-Semitism. I have not witnessed that myself at USC. Where there is anti-Semitism, it absolutely must be denounced. But sometimes, and it's happening to some extent here, charges of anti-Semitism is a way to weaponize the pro-Israel forces to silence the pro-Palestinian critics. And I think what's happening is that is extending all the way to the United States Congress. We've seen the resignation of the presidents of Harvard and Penn. College presidents live in fear of going in front of Elise Stefanik, who is a major representative of ex-President Trump in the U.S. Congress. They live in fear of being called in front of her. I think that there is a very strong parallel here, historic parallel, to the days of Joseph McCarthy, who called people in front of him all the time and basically ruined their careers. Until, in 1954, a lawyer from the U.S. Army, I believe his name was Joseph Welch, finally said to Joseph McCarthy, "Have you no dignity, sir?" I'm paraphrasing. "Have you no shame? Have you no dignity?" The idea that people should be living in fear of a representative Congress, and that's perhaps part of the motivation as to why people are afraid. And it's interesting that this president of University of Minnesota is interim. I wonder how much that is playing into it, because perhaps this president has less to lose than other leaders are thinking they have.
No easy answers if you're an administrator of any of these college campuses in America right now. One of the reporters chimed in. She's been texting me saying, maybe the reason that this was different, and we've talked about this throughout the morning, but it's worth resetting, is because some of these protesters blocked access to students who were trying to have a learning environment at the library. We have heard a lot of Jewish students say that they've been intimidated, that they don't feel safe, that they don't feel that this is a learning environment where they can flourish, and they're paying tuition and they feel that they have the right to learn, and that maybe the free expression of the First Amendment doesn't necessarily extend to college campuses, because that's more about the well-being of the student body.
I mean, the idea that free expression doesn't extend to college campuses, isn't that what college is all about? Isn't what
that's
the
what my college
universities?
experience was
I
about.
mean, you know, look at the history. I mean, the free speech movement was born at Berkeley in the early 1960s. You know, you're talking about civil rights protests, anti-Vietnam protests, anti-apartheid protests. And these all were very much driven by student activism.
I think you make an interesting point, though. With all of those other protests, there seems to be a very clear idea of what people are protesting for. In this case, you know, we have heard that they want a ceasefire, they want divestment from Israel. Is the message just not as clear, and is this just so complicated for people with such a history that maybe this is not getting the full understanding of some of these other protests that we've seen?
I think it's not getting the full understanding. I think that's an important point. I think part of the problem is that historically Palestinian voices just hardly exist in the larger media. There was one study of the first few months of coverage on the different talk shows and cable networks, and out of I think it was 51 hours of coverage in the first few months, there were 140 guests on these talk shows. One was Palestinian. So when you're not getting Palestinian voices, when you're not getting a perspective from people who know what it's like, then all of a sudden you have a disconnect with youth, which has been happening since the Gaza War of 2014. Young people have a different point of view, including many young Jewish people.
Interesting.
And of course, Jewish and Muslim and Arab all have reported feeling uncomfortable. Now, when it's anti-Muslim, when it's Islamophobia, when it's anti-Semitic, that should be denounced. But if somebody's feeling uncomfortable because someone else is yelling Palestine shall be free, that's free speech. That's protected. And I think administrators need to do a better job of being clear about that and meeting face to face like they did at the University of Minnesota.
If you're just joining us, it's 7:26 right now. We are in continuing coverage of the encampment that has been broken up at UCLA. We see a large law enforcement presence there. That's on your screen, but you probably want to know what the weather is going to be like as well. So let's bring in Paul now for a little recap.
I have no idea.
Paul. Hi, Paul. Okay, well, apparently, this is a very fluid situation. Paul's getting himself ready. Can we go to traffic? Is that... Kalina, are you ready? Is your mic? Okay.
I am here. So we do have a couple things going on right now. As you start your morning commute, we have this overturned car right now, eastbound 10 past Crenshaw. That left lane is blocked off and the backup is slow through Mid-City. I'm just going to focus on all the incidents for you this morning. So we have another incident, 405 south at Wilmington. This is a crash with the carpool lane blocked off. We also have a motorcycle crash southbound 14 before Soledad Canyon Road. This one's on the shoulder, but this backup has been here for a couple hours already. And then this crash in Orange County, eastbound 91 at State College. It's on the shoulder, but it's causing a significant delay through this area, leaving the 5. We also have an incident on the 55 south at McFadden where that middle lane is blocked off, also causing a really heavy backup. And this is a look at the Inland Empire where we don't have any incidents so far, but we're watching all of it for you throughout the morning. I believe we do want to get a check on the forecast right now. In just a little bit, we will check in with Paul right now. Paul, what do you got going on?
And Kalina, how are you? Good morning. If one of our producers could let me know how much time we have for this weather hit, that would be awesome. The sky cam in Long Beach right now shows mostly cloudy skies. We have another morning of May gray out there, and we are looking at May gray likely sticking around for the next hour or two. Similar to yesterday, it'll be gone by mid-morning. This is typically the time of year where, we get the stronger onshore push, but we get very little rainfall. May, June, and July, all added together, 3 months, we averaged less than 1/2 of 1 inch of rainfall in total for those 3 months. So we typically don't get that much rainfall, so it's noteworthy that we have even the chance of a few showers coming up this weekend. Now, at a minimum, the weekend's not going to be as sunny and not going to be as mild as we have been now the past 6 days. It's been a 6-day weather winning streak. This weekend, at its warmest, will be 68 degrees. Sunday is going to be a breezy day. Small chance of a shower in the morning, but even if we do or don't get those showers in the wake of that wave coming through, it'll be breezy and cooler and cloudier. So there's a couple other spots you can get to that might be a little bit more pleasant to get outside. But look at the temperature drop. Palm Springs down to 79 on Sunday. Las Vegas down to 70, and Santa Barbara may get some showers Saturday evening and Saturday night. For today, the Inland Empire, you are one of the sunnier spots right now. You are partly sunny in Ontario, where it's 54 degrees. Riverside 55, Santa Clarita 50, Malibu 56. Downtown Los Angeles and Fullerton are the warm spots at 61. For the next several hours, San Fernando Valley, much like yesterday, yes, we have the May gray to begin the day, but by mid to late morning, we go full sunshine, and we should be sunny, but not as warm, 66 degrees at 11 o'clock today. Onshore breeze is with us once again today. I want you to notice here that we're beginning to see a little bit of a dip or sag in the jet stream. It's moving into Northern California and Northern Nevada. That's noteworthy because it likely will continue to sag in our direction and give us that chance of showers coming up this weekend. This morning, another cloudy start. We're 2 for 2 when it comes to May gray, but the afternoon will be pleasant once again. 6 straight mainly sunny and mild afternoons. And then we'll see a repeat of the cloud cover rolling into the Inland Empire and Metro Orange County coming up tomorrow morning. But once again, we'll get the afternoon sunshine. May gray's not that big of a problem if it's gone by 10 o'clock. If you remember last May, it hung out to like 4 or 5 o'clock most days, not in this pattern. Let's look at the weekend now. This is Saturday afternoon where it's raining in San Francisco and Monterey and Carmel. We go cloudy by Saturday afternoon, and some of those showers may make it into Southern California, likely Saturday night and very early Sunday morning. It may be one of those deals where you wake up, the rain's already gone, but your car parked outside is a little bit wet, because we'll likely see even clearing skies by Sunday afternoon, but it's going to be brisk, and temperatures will only be in the low to mid 60s on Sunday afternoon. Simi Valley, only a high of 67 degrees. Here is your extended forecast. We get afternoon sunshine today and tomorrow. Can't say the same about the weekend. It's going to be cloudier. It's going to be cooler, not a washout, not by any stretch, but just not as pleasant to get outside. Highs will be in the upper 60s. And of course, the sunshine comes back early next week. Valleys today back up to 83 with afternoon sunshine. Tomorrow's high 80. But cooling all the way down to 67 by Sunday. And final stop will be the Inland Empire, 80s today and tomorrow, 70s on Saturday and Sunday with that chance of early showers. Most of the day's dry, but it's going to be breezy and chilly with a high of just 68. That's your forecast.
I put the raincoat and sweatshirts away, Paul. This is not supposed to happen.
It's not going to be a washout. I don't even think you'll need them.
All right, Paul, thank you. All right, we want to head back out to the UCLA campus where Tina Patel is standing by in the encampment area that was cleared earlier this morning. Tina, what are we seeing?
Well, you know, it's gotten a lot quieter here. Just a few moments ago, there was a line of CHP over here by the Jan steps because there was a group of protesters here. The officers have left, gone to another part of campus, and the protesters came up, but they kind of just dispersed on their own. A lot of them just kind of looking at what was left behind by this encampment. I'll swing around and you can kind of see, because in the early morning hours, CHP and other law enforcement came through here and actually cleared this encampment that had been here since Thursday. They systematically kind of took the people that were here, mostly students from what we could see, out kind of one by one. They searched them, they zip tied them, and then they led them away. And they said that they're going to be processed and detained. Some of them may be arrested. Some of them may be facing expulsion or other things, disciplinary action from the university. But you can see what's kind of left behind in this encampment. It looks like the people that were here, again, were planning on being here for the long haul. They said that they believed in principle about this issue going on in Palestine and Gaza, and they wanted to get their message across. Here's what one person was saying as they were being detained this morning.
Yeah, I think, students have the right to protest. It's, our First Amendment. And I think that, we need to end the genocide in Gaza. I think that's what's really sad and it's tragic, and it's not justifiable. So, we have to challenge these systems of oppression so that we could free Gaza and free all peoples that are oppressed.
And so your sacrifice really, for you said it's a bigger cause.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not about me, it's about everybody. If I'm free, then what does that mean if my brothers and sisters in Palestine aren't free? It's for everybody, so free Palestine. What do you think about how law enforcement has handled this today? Yeah, I mean, I think that police uphold the system of oppression, and, obviously it's not right. They're just upholding the status quo, so we need to resist, and we need to keep protesting, and that's the only way change will be made, right, by resisting the status quo, so.
You guys are trying to be peaceful, it looks like.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Are you a student here at UCLA?
Yeah.
Get them transported. No,
Senior.
And so that was just one of the students that was detained early this morning. A few others talked to us and kind of had a similar message that they believe that what they're doing doesn't really matter when you consider what other people on the other side of the world are dealing with. Now, again, a lot of people that were here didn't want to talk to us, didn't want to tell us whether they were actually UCLA students or not. A few just in the last couple minutes have been walking through and showing this and kind of being emotional when they look at what is here. But what is not clear exactly is what they're exactly feeling. If they're emotional that this was broken up by law enforcement, if they're emotional that this was allowed to happen in the first place. There have been strong opinions of people on both sides kind of feeling like this encampment never should have been created, and then others feeling like it should have been allowed to stay here. Again, right now it feels like it has quieted down a lot on campus, but there are still a number of protesters around the area. There's still a lot of law enforcement around here. So we'll continue to stand by and monitor the situation, but right now we'll send it back to you.
It is interesting, Jamie and I were just talking about this, to see the encampment and the infrastructure that was built there, basically. They had basically everything covered from what we can see.
They're more organized than me in my kitchen.
Yeah. So obviously they intended to stay there for a long time.
Yeah, and there was a number of people who kind of said that they believed that they had the right to be here and they were going to stay here to keep drawing attention to this issue. And yeah, they do seem like they were very well organized. There are areas right in front of us. We can see kind of a bucket that's set up saying hand wash sink. There are other areas that said they had hygiene areas there. So it felt like they had sort of built this community. They had organized amongst themselves. I will say, as far as the organization, when the law enforcement started moving in this morning, it felt like they had talked about, okay, what do we do? A lot of them had linked arms. They had put on their masks. They had put on goggles and kind of, had prepared for that moment. And although CHP tells us that there were some moments that got tense where there's some items that were thrown, for the most part, it did not feel like people resisted when law enforcement came. They kind of willingly knew that this was going to happen and they willingly let themselves be taken away.
All right, Tina, thank you. We want to check in now with Cara Finstrom, who is also live on campus. And Cara, we saw the flashbangs, heard them behind you earlier on. A very different scene behind you right now, quiet.
It is. We turned the corner. We turned the corner here, and this is what we saw here. You can see behind us, this is Royce Hall, and it appears that they are processing a lot of the people who have been detained here. I was told by a CHP officer some of them are being arrested, and that it is University Police that is handling that when I asked what the charges might be. But we've seen people being led up into Royce Hall here in hand ties and then also brought out. There have been a couple of buses that have left from this area, and all along the curb here you can just see some of the folks who have been detained sitting on the curb. Many of them have bags. I've seen some suitcases, some backpacks. These appear to be people who were in that encampment with some of their belongings that are now being processed. So this has been going on for quite some time now. If we flip our camera around, you mentioned the flashbangs that we heard earlier this morning. This was just down this block, and you can still see some officers here. But listen to what we saw and heard right when we came onto campus. Yeah. Of UCLA, where protesters had very peacefully been pushed to the edge of the campus over about a period of an hour and a half, about 1,000 feet. It took crews of officers to move them that far, just kind of gently pushing them back. We didn't see any scuffling. We didn't see any violence on that side. This was a much different scene. There was someone that was taken to the ground and put into the ties on his wrist, and we saw another person being escorted away as well. But for the most part, that is the extent of the physical confrontation that we have seen here this morning. And as you can see right here now, back out here live, very peaceful as well, very orderly. Folks just kind of sitting. They've been They have the zip ties on the back of their on their wrists. They are sitting along the curb here. They are waiting to be transported. We've seen them talking amongst themselves. So this may take some time because dozens of people here right now, and we know more than 150 are expected to be arrested. So we'll keep you updated. I don't know what the charges will be against those that are actually going to face charges. We understand some of them will just kind of be detained and then released.
And Cara, we saw in that earlier video that we just rolled of you, some of the pro-Palestinian encampment protesters came up to you and talked to you about their frustration that law enforcement is now moving in, as opposed to on Tuesday night when they were actually, when there was violence broke out, when people came from off campus into that encampment.
We've heard that from a number of the protesters who were frustrated. They felt they were attacked when they were having what they called a peaceful demonstration on campus, and said they would like to have seen the police presence earlier. We've really heard the gamut. I mean, we've heard also from students who said they were afraid, to come onto campus, to go to the library. They called their parents, asked them to come pick them up, especially some of the freshmen and sophomores here. So have really heard the gamut as far as reactions to the response of officers and the university. It'll be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next day or two, now that they feel they have really pretty much, it appears, pushed most of the protesters out. Most of them have been detained or left campus. So what's next?
Right. And that's, I think it's important to point out too, excuse me, that the fear is not going to go away for many of these students. Excuse me, Cara, thank you. There was a University of Chicago study that was recently released that found 58% of students who identified as Jewish and 52% of those who said they were Muslim have feared for their safety since October 7th. So it's a widespread fear that is happening in many different communities. We now want to go ahead and check in with Rick Montanez, a different part of the campus. Now, Rick, what are you seeing?
Yeah, Jamie, we are right in between basically where Cara is behind me, and then Tina is just to the other side. So we're in the quad here, right near the flagpole near Royce Quad, if you're familiar with the campus. We want to show you, though, this is the other side of where these protesters are being taken, detained, arrested. A lot of them are being loaded onto these buses here. But check out the law enforcement presence. It's interesting to see because pretty much everywhere you look on campus, you see law enforcement officers, whether it's the Sheriff's Department, CHP, or LAPD, a lot of them in tactical gear. The Highway Patrol officers that are in their tactical gear have basically head-to-toe protection even on their legs, which is something different that we don't necessarily always see with the Sheriff's Department or LAPD. But we've been hearing a lot of these protesters who are cheering for other protesters as they're being brought over to the bus to be loaded up, likely taken to downtown LA is what we're hearing, for them to be booked if they are arrested. 130 is the minimum number we're hearing, about 132, 133 arrested so far. That is from one of the CHP officers that we just interviewed a short time ago. One of the things that Jamie was just mentioning about the fear on campus, it's interesting, we are right here by this little section that was where some of the counter protesters, if you will, a lot of people are arguing against that point, but there's a sign here that says UCLA faculty and staff support our Jewish students and peace. Again, obviously that is the other side of the pro-Palestinian group that started this encampment here. If we can, I know it's difficult for my photographer here, Joe, to swing around just a bit more to show you. So now we're looking toward Royce Hall. That is where the encampment was cleared out here early this morning. But also notice that building tagged up considerably. A lot of vandalism on the walls there. Spray paint, it looks like mostly. Some of it, there's posters hung up there, so that's what has a lot of people upset too, the fact that we're seeing campus buildings defaced. And of course, that is what has changed the minds of administrators who, yesterday when I was over at UC Riverside, where they had set up a small encampment, and I was reading a statement from the president of the University of California campuses that says they support free speech, they support and essentially encourage students to protest and demonstrate, but there is a line in that, which of course is when you infringe upon other people around you. So that is interfering with campus activities, of course, unlawful assembly, vandalism, things like that. So we're seeing a lot of this, a lot of mess that will have to be cleaned up out here. And then again, all the people who are being arrested and detained. But interesting to see so many law enforcement officers out here, a lot of them in tactical gear, a lot of them not in tactical gear, but a considerable shift in mood here, at least in this part of the campus. There were a few protesters still that were walking around in the encampment, and you could tell by their demeanor that some of them looked obviously upset because the encampment was broken up here. But in talking with the CHP, they say they're now making plans for next steps. There's still some activity on campus, so they've got a plan for that. We're waiting for an update from them to see exactly what their next move is. But here right now, we're seeing them still load up some of these protesters that have been detained or possibly arrested. At least 130 protesters arrested at this point. We're hearing that number, of course, will go up. So we'll keep an eye on things, but that is what we have from here near the quad outside of Royce Hall.
All right, Rick, thank you. And of course, that unfolded in front of our cameras, multiple reporters, including Rick, there on the ground, and our cameras. As we've been following this the entire morning, we want to bring back in USC professor Sandy Tolan, who spent years in the UC system at UC Berkeley. You know, Rick mentioned this is a last resort per policy for the UC system to bring in law enforcement when it's disrupting activities on campus. If students are blocked from access, there were reports that students were being blocked from the library, and of course reports that a lot of Jewish students are feeling very intimidated and scared, and that this isn't a conducive learning environment for a lot of people.
No, and these questions should be taken very seriously and looked at very, very seriously. Again, if there are clear statements of anti-Semitism or Islamophobic statements, you know, if we are seeing both Muslim and Jewish and Arab and Palestinian students saying that they feel unsafe. The question is, what degree is that feeling of not being safe? Is it because you're uncomfortable with what other people are saying, or because you're actually threatened? And has it crossed the line into hate speech? That's an important question. What I have seen at USC, it has not been the case from what I have witnessed in my 8 or 10 hours in the encampment there. And also, you know, I know that and I can't really speak because I haven't been on the ground at UCLA, but at USC, there were claims that students were blocking access to buildings. That's simply not true. I mean, I've been at that encampment. It doesn't block anything. It's in a very small part of Alumni Park, like a quarter of it, and people are very respectful, and they're not using bullhorns. So the idea that this is sort of chaotic and hateful, in my experience and observation, is just not what's happening.
At least at USC is from what you're saying. At least what
I've seen at USC, that's right.
At UCLA, the statement was put out by some of the organizers of the pro-Palestinian camp saying that the outside group who came in the other night actually released mice into the camp.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so that's coming out too, as we get kind of a clearer picture in hindsight. As to what's happening.
You know, I think with what you're talking about, as you said, obviously you denounce any anti-Semitism, but in this University of Chicago study, I found it very interesting. About 10% of college students who were polled in this study said that they would permit student groups to call for genocide against Jews, and 13% of college students said that when Jews are attacked, it's because they deserve it. So there are...
That's absolutely deplorable.
Right.
And no one I know of all the professor colleagues that I have, and no one I have talked to at the camp, again, many Jewish students.
And this is a national study, I should point out. This wasn't a local study.
And that is very disturbing, and that should absolutely not be tolerated. Those kinds of things. But what is a call to is from the river to the sea a call for genocide? I do not believe it is. We discussed that a little bit earlier. To me, and historically, looking at this for the last 30 years and writing a couple of books, it's a call for equality of all the people living between the river and sea, and that includes Israelis and Palestinians.
We've seen, though, in other protests, you know, I think back with what you're saying, you look at the Black Lives Matter protests. Black Lives Matter was the chant of those protesters. You then, on the other side, had people saying all lives matter. So you could see where some Jewish people would find what you're saying anti-Semitic. But how do you kind of then, in this situation that is so much more complex in many ways and has such rich history, how do we get to understanding that there are two things that could potentially be true in this movement? In terms of the atrocities that are happening in Gaza, as well as people feeling that there are anti-Semitic statements and some of the sentiment that's out there.
Right. I mean, again, it has to do with, to me, crossing the line between free speech and hate speech. If somebody feels uncomfortable by someone shouting "Palestine shall be free," you know, feeling uncomfortable is part of becoming an adult and becoming a citizen. And the history of protest goes back so many years to the civil rights movement, the free speech movement. It started in Berkeley in the early 60s, the protests after the murder of George Floyd. So I think people have to understand that free speech is enshrined, and academic freedom is enshrined in universities. Where it crosses the line to hate speech is another matter. And again, I haven't seen that at the USC encampment.
What about just the learning environment? I mean, what is it like right now to be teaching on campus, to be a student on campus? It doesn't look like it's easy to study for your final, for example, right now at USC or UCLA.
Well, yesterday I was part of a group of maybe 200 faculty who wanted to send a message to the president and provost of USC that we are supporting our students, their right to free speech. At that very moment, no press was allowed onto campus, so we walked to the gates and gave interviews through the bars to local journalists who were not allowed to come in. And what is going on with that? What kind of restrictions on the press is USC? What are they trying to get out of this kind of repression and lack of access to the press? But in terms of the students, I mean, it's happening in different ways. I taught a class in podcasting at the Annenberg School this year, and on our just a week ago yesterday, when the encampment was just growing, we started hearing the roar of police helicopters, and we had to stop class not because of the protests, not because of the encampment, but because of the roar of police helicopters. And yesterday, when the faculty assembled to express our support for the students and their right to free speech, one of the leaders of the faculty group read a message from the president of USC saying, please be respectful and not be too loud or disruptive because it's study days. He had to shout that over the sound of an LA police helicopter, which was not exactly respecting study days itself.
Is there a healthy debate happening among students? Is this a topic of discussion in class? And especially for you who teaches journalism, what better education for these students right now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, those of us who are, you know, proud of the teaching that we do and happy with our exchanges with students, as am I think we understand that to some degree what's happening outside of the classroom and the exchanges that are happening are in some ways more formative of learning how to be a citizen and an engaged citizen. I don't know if right now, I don't know the extent to which the exchanges are creating new perceptions and new ideas. I can see that happening to some extent, and I hope that people can understand that, again, with so many Jewish students in the USC camp, that it's not inherently anti-Semitic. And if people can just come and visit those students, I think they'll see that this is a very disciplined, very serious community that they have built over the last week with like rules of codes of conduct You know, there's medical tents, food tents, hygiene. I mean, it's kind of an amazing community that they've created. It reminds me of when I covered Standing Rock in North Dakota 8 years ago. That was that same sort of very serious creation of community in a protest against a very large series of forces, in that case oil companies in North Dakota.
You know, I do think there's debate about the fact, you're talking about how you had to go to the gates and talk to journalists not being let in at USC. USC is a private school, UCLA is a public school. We've watched this now play out at Columbia as well, which is a private school with some of these things. Is there a debate between how free speech is talked about at both a private school and a public school?
I mean, I've heard some talk about that, right? That because the UC system is public, that inherently, well, we thought with UCLA, it looked like the responses for a while were very different between USC and UCLA. I think that line of distinction is getting blurred now with the action that UCLA has taken. But it's true that USC is a private university. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what the legal rights for closing campus are. But on Saturday night, a number of faculty came down because there was discussion of an action against the encampment. About 20 of us went down there on Saturday night to express our support. I had no plans to get arrested and was not arrested, but I can tell you that for the first time in the 16 years I've been teaching at USC, even showing my ID to get on campus was not enough. They said, you can't come. It's only for students. And I said, I have to get something out of my office, which I did. But the idea that professors at that moment weren't even allowed on campus is, you know, that goes over the line to me.
All right. Well, we are going to take just a quick check of weather now, moving to things that people need to know before they head out the door as well, Paul.
And we have that May gray outside for a second consecutive day. We can see it from Mount Wilson looking down in our inland valleys. It is completely covered in cloud cover. I do expect by 10 or 11 o'clock the clouds will be gone, but it's 7:55 and it is very cloudy outside right now. 2 for 2 when it comes to May gray so far this month. We are looking at mostly cloudy skies in downtown Los Angeles. It's another gray start, but will be another sunny finish. That is 6 beautiful afternoons in a row. We're not going to make it to 10 because we have some changes coming up for the weekend. There is a small chance of showers, but a very high chance will be cooler, breezier, and cloudier. Santa Ana right now, it is 60 degrees outside, 62 in downtown, 52 in Santa Clarita, and 56 degrees in Riverside. Next 4 hours in and around the metro area, cloudy through about 9. 10 o'clock we go partly cloudy. We're sunny by 11. And your forecast for Santa Ana, notice we're cooler on Saturday. We're in the 70s today and tomorrow, but down to 67 degrees on Saturday. The pattern's shifting. This ridge of high pressure will retreat to the west, allowing this storm off the Alaska coastline to hit the northwest, but then dive to the south. For you this morning, a cloudy start, but it will be a mainly sunny finish, except for right along the immediate coastline. Tomorrow morning, we'll have another push of that cloud cover moving through. But then this weekend, we have a front passing by to the north, giving us a small chance of showers Saturday into Sunday. Back to you.
All right, Paul, thank you for that quick check of weather. And now we're going to end this show and start the next one. See you at 8 o'clock.
KCAL News Mornings.
Good morning. You are watching KCAL News Mornings at 8 o'clock this morning. It's been a very busy one. I'm Jamie Yukas.
I'm Rudy Shabazi. Protesters detained and an encampment broken down. We are continuing our live breaking news coverage after police made more than 100 arrests at the UCLA encampment. Let's get you quickly caught up on what's been happening this morning. Police started their dispersal orders around 6 p.m. last night, and then at around 2:45 this morning, police advanced on the encampment and started detaining the protesters.
By 4:45, police had successfully cleared the area. Since then, police have slowly been taking detained protesters away, while other protesters still remain on campus in smaller numbers, though, now at 8 o'clock this morning.
Dozens of protesters are being held on the UCLA campus. Many were being loaded into buses for processing at detention centers.
Our Cara Finstrom has a look live at the processing going on right now. You've been with us through all of the morning, Cara, even seeing flashbangs and other situations happen behind you.
And it's really quieted down, although that processing still taking place right behind us. This is actually Haynes Hall. It's in the Royce Quad area, and we have seen people being taken in and out with the zip ties on their wrists and all along the curb. They've brought these police cars in now, but if we can kind of squeeze past that, you can see some of the folks that are seated there. Some of them have actually had bags with them or suitcases. It appears that they were part of the encampments as well, and some of them are being put onto this sheriff's bus and then taken out. We're told by CHP officers out here that some are being arrested, others are being detained for now and may not face charges, and that is up to university police. Now, earlier this morning, if we pan down the block, that is the direction we were coming from. We were headed onto campus when we heard that loud flashbang. And a scuffle here. We had moved across campus from a crowd that had just dispersed and stumbled upon this. There were pockets across the campus that police were working to kind of subdue, to try and get them off of campus, and in some cases to arrest them. And we did see one man being taken to the ground with zip ties put on his wrists, another man also being put into zip ties and taken away. One of the protesters who rushed up to our camera said that he felt the show of force was unnecessary.
The Zionist gangs yesterday were torturing us for hours and they didn't show up. I called 911 twice and they hung up on me. Today they show up to arrest students who are protesting.
And he was actually hoping, he said, for a police presence earlier in the week when he felt counter-protesters had turned things violent. This is also some video that we want to show you of the other side of campus. As I mentioned, we started our day at about 3 a.m. on the other side of campus where there was chanting, and this was right after police had moved in, a group that had been pushed back. And I can tell you that over about a period of an hour and a half, we watched as this group was pushed about 1,000 feet from Kaplan Hall to the street that just, is right at the border of UCLA, and then just dispersed. It was very peaceful. People continued to protest, to chant, but we saw no real scuffling, just kind of a very slow push off campus there. So we've seen a variety of reactions today to this massive law enforcement presence, which has really just kind of slowly pushed all of the protesters off of campus. Now we will be waiting to hear from the university as to what is next for them. We know that some of the students on the other side of the coin said that they would have liked police to have done this sooner. They felt that it's been unsafe on this campus. They called their parents. They wanted to leave the campus. They felt that a lot of things that were unfolding shouldn't have happened on a college campus. So a lot of discussions for the days ahead as far as what force was required, what force should have been used or not used here. But at this point, it seems things have calmed down. and we will be waiting to learn more about the total numbers who were detained, the total numbers who were arrested, and whether there were any serious injuries or not. That question hasn't yet been answered.
All right, great reporting out there, Cara. Thank you. And as you can see behind Cara, there is still a very large law enforcement presence, that task force on campus.
Yeah, at least 250 CHP officers, as well as many other different agencies involved. KCAL News reporter Rick Montanez live outside of Royce Hall, where protesters were arrested earlier this morning. We know at least 132 at last count, Rick.
Yeah, Jamie Rudabay, that's what we heard from CHP when we were interviewing them earlier, just a short time ago here on air. And what I want to show you is what's happening here where that encampment was. It's interesting. We, talk about law enforcement all morning. Now we're also seeing security teams move in. CSC security, Apex security. They are out here making a sweep through the encampment along with LAPD still in tactical gear. It appears they may be trying to find more people who maybe have been left behind, some of the protesters who didn't quite get picked up in that sweep when they were making their way through the encampment in the early morning hours. But yeah, this is where they picked up a lot of those protesters, detained them, arrested them, essentially zip-tied them and brought them over. Let's show you some video if I believe we have that ready for you to show you just before sunrise what it was like as these protesters were taken over to the bus where they were detained, and then of course they if they are arrested, they'll be taken downtown to be booked, is what we're told. So there is still a lot going on. In talking with CHP earlier, they said that there were other spots on campus where they still had some resistance from protesters who remained here on campus. As you've seen in the video, a lot of people have been out here within the last week, of course even last night, and there were a lot of people who were not in the encampment itself, and so some of them have moved to other parts of campus, and so that's what they were trying to clear out. The CHP telling me that a lot of people actually just left campus on their own. Some of them were forced off campus as those police skirmish lines with officers and deputies in tactical gear had made their way through to try and force people off campus. And that is the first thing we saw this morning when myself and my photographer Joe Ruiz, we arrived here at UCLA. We saw immediately a line of getting people out of the way. So there is still a lot that they're going to have to clean up. There's vandalism that they will have to take care of. We're seeing more law enforcement come out from some of these buildings here on campus, presumably some of them going in to take breaks. They've been here all night as well. So there is still a lot of activity going on. There's a lot to figure out, as Cara was mentioning. We're trying to figure out, was anyone seriously injured, and what are the exact numbers of those arrested. We are hearing, at least at this point, at least 130 people. That number likely to rise, and we'll keep pressing for answers, and we will share them with you as soon as we get it. Reporting live at UCLA, we'll go back to you.
What an eventful morning, Rick. Thank you. We are waiting for President Biden to address the protests on campus, but in the meantime, let's get a look at the desk with Mark Liu. And Mark, you know this campus very well.
Yeah, Rudabay and Jamie, I've been following these developments at UCLA all night and into the morning. I can tell you finally getting some details, but I want to go instead now. We understand that the president is beginning to speak. Let's go to take a live look at that right now.
College campuses here. We've all seen the images, and they put to the test two fundamental American principles. Excuse me. The first is the right to free speech and for people to peacefully assemble and make their voices heard. The second is the rule of law. Both must be upheld. We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail. Throughout our history, we've often faced moments like this because we are a big, diverse, free-thinking, and freedom-loving nation. In moments like this, there are always those who rush in to score political points. But this isn't a moment for politics. It's a moment for clarity. So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education. Look, it's basically a matter of fairness. It's a matter of what's right. There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos. People have the right to get an education, the right to get a degree, the right to walk across the campus safely without fear of being attacked. But let's be clear about this as well. There should be no place on any campus, no place in America for anti-Semitism or threats of violence against Jewish students. There is no place for hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans. It's simply wrong. There's no place for racism in America. It's all wrong. It's un-American. I understand people have strong feelings and deep convictions. In America, we respect the right and protect the right for them to express that. But it doesn't mean anything goes. It needs to be done without violence, without destruction, without hate, and within the law. You know, make no mistake, as president, I will always defend free speech, and I will always be just as strong in standing up for the rule of law. That's my responsibility to you, the American people, my obligation to the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, have the protests forced you to reconsider any of the policies with regard to the region?
No. Thank you. Mr. President, do you think the National Guard should intervene? No. Do you agree with what the students are calling for?
Mr. President, the former president.
Okay, we just were listening to President Biden speak about the protests. He said everyone has a right to free speech, but not that it has to be peaceful protests. He called vandalism, destroying property, trespassing, and forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations, not peaceful protests.
Well, we want to bring in our guest, USC professor Sandy Tolan is with us this morning, and he also said it's not a moment for politics. But if I'm listening to this very carefully as he's towing the line, talking about, we also can't have a lawless country. This sounds very much, the former President Trump yesterday was using the Columbia protests as a point of for his campaign, saying that it was a beautiful sight to see New York police go after and get these protesters out of the buildings there. Is this a political moment for the president?
Of course it is. He's the president. But also, what does it mean this is not a time for politics? I mean, what is politics but the discussion of ideas and what policies should go forward? I mean, you look all back throughout the history of protests, whether it's civil rights, Vietnam, the protests after the George Floyd murder, and talk of police reform, it's all politics. So the idea that there's a pro-Palestinian protest that shouldn't discuss politics, I'm not even sure what he means by that. Clearly, he's straddling the line here. I can appreciate that he is advocating for free speech and also for order. But I heard a lot of law and order in those brief remarks. That reminds me of when I was very young. Hearing the Attorney General John Mitchell, Nixon's Attorney General, talking about law and order, and by implication, he's saying that these have been violent protests, and in all of what I've witnessed with the pro-Palestinian encampments, they are not violent. So what is exactly the violence he's talking about? Some of it, for example, at UCLA, were mobs attacking the pro-Palestinian protesters.
He actually laid out in what he was saying that canceling classes and instilling fear are both, in his mind, violent.
Right. Well, I think canceling classes is not an act of violence. But who is canceling the graduation? I mean, what USC did was cancel the valedictorian speech of Asna Tabassum because she had pro-Palestinian views and pro-Israel groups objected to those views, and USC, in my opinion, gave in to those concerns. She, and if you look at those, she is not an anti-Semite. She did a minor in genocide studies, and so she's a very sophisticated person. But the idea of blaming the protests for canceling graduation, USC canceled the graduation. USC canceled her valedictorian speech, and now they've canceled the main graduation ceremony. You can't blame the protesters for that, because they're the ones that started, the USC is the one that started this whole chain of events at my university by canceling her speech.
Well, she did amplify a post on social media that called for the destruction of Israel. Well,
what does that mean exactly? Did it call for a single state solution between the river and the sea? I mean, there's a difference between calling for the destruction and for genocide against Jewish people or against Israelis. That is hate speech, but my understanding of what she posted did not call for that.
Professor Tolan, I do want to ask you, the New York Times just put out an article that I'm finding fascinating. They talked to students at universities across the country, dozens of them, to get their viewpoint on what is happening here. And overwhelmingly, the students are saying it's not just Gaza, that student protesters actually see links to global struggle. They're connecting it to policing, the mistreatment of indigenous people, racism, and the impact of climate change. Are those the discussions you're hearing on your campus?
Yes, I mean, what the university people call intersectionality. There's a lot of connection that these young people are making in their, we're trying to get them to be critical thinkers. And the encampment at USC, for example, is an exercise in that. Now, we don't have to agree with them. I don't agree with all of their demands. It doesn't matter whether I do or not. They have a right to make those demands as long as it doesn't cross into hate speech. And I would respectfully disagree with the president in characterizing the pro-Palestinian encampments as being violent and hateful, because in my experience anyway, they have not been. But what has been violent is some of the attacks against them.
Well, he mentioned vandalism, trespassing, and creating an environment where students couldn't learn. We have seen a lot of vandalism at UCLA, at least.
You mean like the graffiti, for
Yes.
example?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We don't know who's, it's hard to track down who does all of that. That's deplorable. Does it require bringing in so many CHP officers that they outnumber the protesters themselves because of some graffiti? I don't think so. I mean, I think it's the speech itself that is considered threatening, and a lot of university presidents, again, are very worried about being hauled up in front of Congress. And ex-President Trump's representative, Elise Stefanik, who has basically shamed some college presidents into resigning, in my view, they should not have resigned.
Well, that's the former president also speaking at a rally in Wisconsin yesterday, talking about these same types of things and calling all this deplorable. Professor, we want you to stick around. We're going to continue the discussion. But first, we need to get a check of our weather and our traffic this morning. Let's go ahead and see what's happening out on the roadways with Kalina.
Hi, good morning. So at 8:17 in the morning, we do have this SIG alert right now, which is a dirt spill. It should be here for the next 20 minutes. So we've seen this happen quite often lately. The 105 west before Crenshaw, the middle lane is blocked off. That backup is building from just before the 710. We also have some good news. Eastbound 10 past Crenshaw, lanes now open. We had an overturned car there that cleared from lanes. Still take you about 28 minutes to get through that stretch, and almost an hour on the westbound side of the 10 from the 110 to the 405. We also have this one. It's now on the shoulder, 60 west past Paramount Boulevard. It was a crash there. That backup, though, building from the City of Industry. We also have this incident. This is out in the Inland Empire. We have this crash, 215 heading southbound, right at the 15 South. That left lane is blocked off there. You can see the red building through the city of Marietta. And then in Orange County, we have this crash, southbound 405 past Warner. That left lane is blocked off. You can see the backup through this stretch as well. And then we have this one that just popped up, northbound 5 past Crown Valley Road. We have the right lanes blocked off. It's just a slight backup right now, but this will continue to build because anytime something happens right through that stretch, it does get very, very slow. All right, we do want to take a look at the forecast now. Here is Paul Diano. Good morning.
Hi, Kalina. Good morning to you at home. We are looking at May gray continuing for the next hour or two. The good news is, in this pattern, it doesn't stick around for the entire day. It sticks around for a little bit. We're seeing that little bit happening right now. We are cloudy in Long Beach. Let's go above the clouds, up to about 5,600 feet in elevation, looking down on the San Gabriel Valley, which is currently covered in clouds, the view from Mount Wilson. This weekend, Changes, not as warm, no 70s out there. Even the Inland Empire, which has been in the 80s almost every afternoon for the past week, will drop to the 60s. Small chance of a shower Saturday night, Sunday morning. That's not the big deal. The big deal will be the cooler and cloudier weather moving through. Even places like Palm Springs not hitting 80 on Sunday. Las Vegas down to 70. So it's colder air that will move in and a small chance of a shower leading to weather that's not as pleasant to get outside, especially on Sunday. Long Beach with those clouds, it is currently 62. Riverside, you're cloudy and 56. Simi Valley 56. Lancaster breezy 61. It's 60 at Los Angeles International Airport and 60 degrees right now for Santa Ana. Orange County, sunshine's coming. Got to wait till about 10 or 11 o'clock, and by lunchtime you'll be in the upper 60s with mainly sunny skies. Moreno Valley, you'll be in the 80s today and tomorrow. Cooler on Saturday, much cooler on Sunday, likely not hitting 70 degrees. So if you have the choice for outdoor activities over the weekend, Saturday or Sunday, I choose Saturday. It's going to be drier and it's going to be a little sunnier, but much milder. One storm is moving through the northwest and doing what it should do. It moves to the east, not diving down toward us. This storm here will have the opportunity to move into at least northern California. But even if it doesn't rain one drop at your house, the boundary moves through. It'll be breezy and much cooler on Sunday. Today, we start with clouds. We finish with sunshine. By mid-morning onward, most of us will be mostly sunny. The coast may be the exception. Inland Empire, Metro Orange County fills up with the cloud cover once again tomorrow. Here's a look at Saturday afternoon. Steady rainfall, northern and central California. The jury is still out as to how much of the rain makes it into Southern California. This model is a bit more aggressive, but notice the time. It's while you're sleeping on Sunday morning. It's out of here by 9 or 10, any shower chance. But in the wake of that boundary moving through, rain or not, breezy and cooler. Riverside, only 68. Simi Valley, only 68 degrees. So we're dry this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon. We will get cloudier by Saturday afternoon with a high of 68. Then on Sunday, that chance of a shower and a high of only 67. Sunshine does return next week. For our valleys, we're looking at 80s today and tomorrow, much cooler this weekend. Comparing today to Sunday, 16 degrees cooler with warmer weather returning next week. Slight shower chance on Sunday morning. That's your forecast. We'll be right back.
All right,
welcome back.
We want to get a check with Mark Liu now, who's been looking at the geography of the campus as these protests unfolded at UCLA and the encampment was broken up. Mark.
Yeah, that's right, Jamie and Rudabeh. So all morning I've been trying to get information from the multiple law enforcement agencies that are down at UCLA about what's going to happen to all of these protesters that have been taken into custody and what are they going to be charged with. I've got some video of the buses and the protesters from where Cara Finstrom was live a little bit earlier. Now, listening to the UCLA PD frequencies, they say that the buses that are being loaded with these detainees are filled with people that are going to be charged with two different penal codes, PC 409 and PC 148. Now, PC 409 is a misdemeanor. It's a failure to disperse after an unlawful assembly. That carries a fine of up to $1,000 and up to 6 months in jail. The majority of people that have been detained are facing this PC 409 charge. Now, there are a few of these protesters that are facing something called PC 148. That's resisting arrest or failing to comply with the peace officer. That's also a misdemeanor, carries a fine of up to $1,000 and up to a year in jail. Now, neither of these two charges likely will involve jail time immediately. They probably will be citations and then they'll be released, but they're not going to be released at UCLA. We are hearing that there are three entire buses filled with detainees. One is going to the Inmate Reception Center. That's the LA Sheriff's Facility downtown. One is going to a place called the MDC. That's the LAPD Detention Center, also downtown. The third bus is being going to some place called CJAC. I'm not familiar with that. I actually called LAPD headquarters and said, where is CJAC? What kind of a facility is that? They didn't know. It might be the Men's Central Jail. There are still 65 protesters in custody on campus waiting to get on a bus. And they said the unofficial total from the UCLA PD officers on scene is that 195 people in total are in custody from being in this encampment this morning, and they intend to take all of them off campus to any of these processing centers to cite them, very likely, and then we'll release them. They'll have a hearing on those charges later. So that's what we know so far in terms of where the protesters are going this morning. Jamie, Rudabeh.
Still no update beyond the 132 protesters taken into custody, right, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, it was an unofficial count. They said at least 195 between the three buses and the 65 that are still waiting to get on a bus to go to a processing center.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. And we will be right back.
might get taken. This is KCAL News Mornings.
Good morning. You're watching KCAL News Mornings at 8 o'clock this morning. It is currently 8:30. I'm Jamie Yukas.
I'm Rudy Shabazi. Protesters detained and encampment broken down. We are continuing our breaking news live coverage after police made arrests at the UCLA encampment. Let's get you quickly caught up with what's been happening. Police started their dispersal orders at around 6 p.m. last night. At around 2:45 this morning, police advanced on that encampment and started detaining protesters.
By 4:45 in the morning, police had successfully cleared the area. Since then, police have slowly been taking detained protesters away. There are still some students on campus and some protesters there as well. It's now been roughly 6 hours since law enforcement moved in on that encampment.
Yeah, we have been live all morning bringing this to you from the ground. Officials are preparing to clean up the graffiti and the trash at Royce Squad. And KCAL News reporter Tina Patel has been live. She joins us now with a look at the aftermath of this. Tina.
Yeah, good morning. The encampment has been cleared now, and we're kind of being kept on the other side of the barricade. Security's here to keep people out. But if we kind of look over there, you can see just what is left of what was here for about a week on the UCLA campus. Early this morning, police moved in. They started to clear people. They started to detain a number of people. They tell us about 132 people were arrested because they would not leave what would have been determined to be an unlawful gathering. And now we're just looking at the remnants of their camp. Let me show you a little bit of video because it also shows you some of the graffiti to the buildings that were immediately on either side of this encampment. It does seem like the people that had started to camp here, a number of them students, but it looks like also some outsiders, they had planned to be here for a while. They said that they had some demands. They wanted the university to divest from companies doing business with Israel. They also wanted to see a ceasefire in Gaza, and they seemingly prepared to be here for a long time to try to get that message across. We talked to CHP this morning about the effort to clear the encampment after it had been declared unlawful. Here's what they told us about how the operation went on their perspective.
From our perspective, it went well. We did meet some resistance. We had some protesters throw smoke, fire extinguishers, and other items to our officers. However, the encampment is clear at this time. We only have a few protesters that are refusing to leave the campus, which our officers are dealing with at this time.
Any of your officers injured when they Now, we were able to talk to a few people as they were being detained. Again, a number of them telling that they still believe in this cause. They feel like this is a cause that is bigger than them. When we tried to ask if there was any plans to maybe come back after they got out of custody or if they wanted to start a new kind of occupation, they really said they didn't feel comfortable talking to the media and they didn't want to talk about what their plans are. But that, of course, is something that the university security and the law enforcement is going to be keeping an eye on. Is they cleared this encampment, they detained a number of people, but there are still people around that have these same views, and they don't know if they're going to come and try to start something again or not, but they're on standby for that. We will send it back to you.
Okay, Tina, thank you. We want to check in now with Rick Montanez, who is also on campus, or Sandy.
Yeah.
Hi, Sandy.
Professor Sandy Tolan, USC journalism professor. You know, as we've been watching this all unfold, it's not lost on me. CBS News reporting in the Mideast, Iranian state television carried live images of this police interaction with the protesters, as did Qatar's pan-Arab Al Jazeera satellite network. There were live images playing out across Israeli television networks. How is this seen throughout the world as they're witnessing what's taking place at these campuses?
Well, it depends on what part of the world we're talking about, and Europe would be different than Israel. Israel obviously very different than the Arab world and the larger Muslim world. You know, I found in my travels that across the Muslim world and as far away as parts of Philippines, that the affinity to the Palestinian cause and the sense that Palestinians are under occupation and have never been given their own liberation, their own sovereignty, their own state. That is something that resonates across the Muslim world. And Al Jazeera is on the ground telling, I think, doing a pretty good job to a large extent. There are a lot of very good examples of press in the U.S. telling a powerful story. But you know, it's clear that moments like this are going to be conveyed in other parts of the world as repressive police actions, and that's how it'll be understood in many parts of the world.
All right, we heard President Biden saying this is not a time for politics, but everyone is using it for their political gain, it looks like right now.
I'm not even sure what he meant by that, because protests themselves are political in nature. He also said, you know, that he implied that the protests themselves, the pro-Palestinian protests, have been violent. I have not witnessed that at USC, and I've spent many hours in the encampment. And I haven't seen, you know, at UCLA there were attacks on the Palestinian camp. So on the one hand, the president was implying in his comments this morning that the protests have been violent, but then later the White House released a statement saying that the president just wanted to ensure that the protests remain peaceful. So, you know, which is it?
Yeah, that's a senior White House official actually telling CBS News a number of violent incidents over the past 48 hours is what actually led the president to get up. And we've seen that in other situations where the president wants to kind of calm things down, but then, as you said, later said, ensure that the protests remain peaceful. So I think there's even maybe some misunderstanding as to how to convey a message, especially as you have former President Trump getting up and using these protests politically himself with his supporters.
Absolutely, and for the president to say this is not a time for politics, well, what is he doing on television? I mean, he's being political as a president would be, and he is in a very, very difficult position, because on the one hand, he wants to show that he also is a law and order president. He said order must prevail, which sounds like something that would have been said during the Nixon administration and the Vietnam protests. And on the other hand, you're seeing in states, in many Democratic primaries, you're seeing 8, 10, up to 19% people voting for none of the above, basically, uncommitted. This is a very powerful, very deliberate statement from not just Arab American voters, but people who are very, very discouraged,
young voters,
and
from what
young
we're talking
voters who are saying we're not going to vote, and who are sending a message saying that the president's policy on Gaza and the U.S. sending so many billions of dollars of weapons to Israel is not something they can support. And you know, a lot of analysts are thinking that this could cost President Biden the election. It's too early to say.
Let's talk about this idea of violence on the campuses. So regardless of who started it, and you know, there was a lot of confusion as it was happening on Tuesday night on the UCLA campus, we see the images of the violence, no matter who is carrying them out, whether it's someone, you know, outside agitators who come onto the campus who are not students, whether it's the students themselves. But is there a point to be made about the greater issue of safety on campus and feeling comfortable on campus, no matter who's perpetrating the violence, that the campus administrators need to just clear it out so that no one is attacked by anyone?
I think that the tactics that have been invited by university administrators, by bringing in the LAPD, have accelerated the problem, not reduced it. I think clearly everyone has a right to feel safe, whether it's a Jewish student, a Muslim student, an Arab American student, as the president mentioned. But the idea that you can solve it by militarizing your campus, when in fact it actually accelerates the issue, it deepens the problem. There have been very few college administrators, with the notable exception this morning, as Jamie pointed out to me, at the University of Minnesota, that where people actually are sitting down with protesters. There have been a couple of other places, and saying, okay, what do you want? We can't give you everything you want, but what is the issue here? Let's have a discussion. Isn't that what you're supposed to do at a university?
Well, that's what we used to do in this country, right? But we've become a country that is very black and white. There's
a lot of polarization.
There's a lot of polarization, and I think this just speaks to where we're at as a society.
I think that's a good point. But, you know, leaders, true leaders, break the mold, they break through. I would love nothing more than the USC President Carol Folt to walk out of her office at Bovard Auditorium today, or Bovard, and sit down. You know, sit down, sit on the grass with the people and meet with them and find out what they're thinking. You know, she may feel the need to have a security detail, fine, but just you know, this is not a dangerous place. Walking onto the, I've spent like 10 hours there. It's not a dangerous place. They have not been blocking access to buildings, in my view, and when you see the geography of it, they're not blocking. So can we actually talk? Can we have a dialogue? I don't see that happening so far.
And that's tragic,
truly.
truly.
I just think there is always another solution. Minnesota is showing, the University of Minnesota is showing that, and there could have been another solution. If USC had not canceled Aslan Tabassum's valedictorian speech, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
All right. Well, Professor Sandy Tolan from USC, we really appreciate all your insight today. It's been really invaluable, especially with your knowledge of the conflict for the last 30 years and your knowledge of the UC system. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And you know, it's clear what happened on October 7th was horrific, and Hamas committed terrorist acts, horrible acts, but what has followed is the death of up to 35,000 Palestinians, most women and children, and the right to object to that is enshrined in the right to free speech, and that's what we're seeing across the college campuses.
All right, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, there is still a large police presence on campus.
Yeah, KCAL News reporter Rick Montanez is live outside of Royce Howell this morning, where protesters were arrested earlier. The number now at about 195, Rick, we're told.
Yeah, and you know, we heard Mark talk just a few moments ago about some of them still on campus. Well, we still see at least one bus, two buses still here, but it looks like most of the detained who were sitting on the curb have been loaded up on the bus, at least from our vantage point right now. Another thing I want to point out that we noticed just within the last maybe 3 to 5 minutes, we started seeing campus crews come in and start the cleanup process. You see some of them here working. They're carrying around tools to pick up trash and other things left on the ground. And then, of course, over at the encampment, they're starting to do that too. But we've also seen them start to pick up some of the barricades. So all of this going on while they're still trying to pull out the last of the detained protesters here on campus. But you see a lot of the work. I mean, they have so much to clean up, especially in the encampment area. So it was interesting a few minutes ago to see them kind of move their way in large numbers and start that cleanup. But we are still seeing a lot of law enforcement. Let's show you video from a short time ago this morning as a lot of those protesters were being detained, arrested. They were zip tied and then walked over. And I talked with the CHP officer earlier who said they did assign an officer to each of those arrested or detained protesters for their safety, for officers and campus safety, apparently. That's what we were told anyway, to keep an eye on them as they made their way through the line to then go sit on the curb and then be loaded onto the buses to be taken downtown for booking and be processed. And so one thing that we noticed too, some of the protesters were laughing with some of the officers. Some of them were clearly very upset that they were being detained. So it runs the gamut of emotions, as we've seen out here from these protesters all week long that they've been here. But as we come back to our live picture, you can see in this video here, there is so much wood, plywood, wood pellets that are being loaded up by campus crews here to clean up the encampment now that it's been broken down and the protesters cleared out of here. You know, I was here on last Thursday morning when they started this encampment, and it was interesting as I walked through campus to get over here to Royce Quad to see people walking up carrying these wood pallets and different pieces of plywood, things like that, to set up the encampment and close it off. And so we've seen how it's grown over the last week, and then now how it's being dismantled by campus officials here after being cleared out by LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, CHP, hundreds of officers out here, close to 200 detained, possibly arrested as well. We're waiting to get more on those numbers, but we're seeing all of this go on right now as they try to restore order here to the UCLA campus. But again, hearing the different stories of whether the police were too rough or the protesters should have left earlier. You know, a lot of this happening close to 12 hours after they got that dispersal notice yesterday at 6 o'clock. So we'll keep an eye on things, and we'll send it back to you for now.
All right, it's nice to see things calm there, Rick. Thank you. This is a video from overnight where we have been following the dismantling of the pro-Palestinian encampment at UCLA. You can see some of the demonstrators being hauled away there. We know 195 students detained at this point. We'll continue to check on the scene, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. President Joe Biden did address the campus protests spreading across the nation a little bit earlier this morning.
Yeah, he spoke just a short time ago from the White House. Here's what he had to say.
Morning. Before I head to North Carolina, I wanted to speak for a few moments about what's going on our college campuses here. We've all seen images, and they put to the test two fundamental American principles. Excuse me. The first is the right to free speech and for people to peacefully assemble and make their voices heard. The second is the rule of law. Both must be upheld. We are not an authoritarian nation where we silence people or squash dissent. The American people are heard. In fact, peaceful protest is in the best tradition of how Americans respond to consequential issues. But, neither are we a lawless country. We are a civil society, and order must prevail. Throughout our history, we've often faced moments like this because we are a big, diverse, free-thinking, and freedom-loving nation. In moments like this, there are always those who rush in to score political points. But this isn't a moment for politics. It's a moment for clarity. So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Dissent is essential to democracy, but dissent must never lead to disorder or to denying the rights of others so students can finish the semester and their college education. Look, It's basically a matter of fairness. It's a matter of what's right. There's the right to protest, but not the right to cause chaos. People have the right to get an education, the right to get a degree, the right to walk across the campus safely without fear of being attacked. But let's be clear about this as well. There should be no place on any campus, no place in America for anti-Semitism or threats of violence against Jewish students. There is no place for hate speech or violence of any kind, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or discrimination against Arab Americans or Palestinian Americans. It's simply wrong. There's no place for racism in America. It's all wrong. It's un-American. I understand people have strong feelings and deep convictions. In America, we respect the right and protect the right for them to express that. But it doesn't mean anything goes. It needs to be done without violence, without destruction, without hate, and within the law. You know, make no mistake, as president, I will always defend free speech, and I will always be just as strong in standing up for the rule of law. That's my responsibility to you, the American people, and my obligation to the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, have the protests forced you to reconsider any of the...
Okay, that was President Biden speaking earlier, coming out and saying that he respects the rule of law and that violence is not protected speech, but free speech does protect the peaceful right to assembly and protest. And notably, when he walked away, reporters shouted some questions at him. He said he does not want to send in the National Guard, and this is not sparking a change in policy direction for him.
Yeah, it's very interesting. He went into that this isn't a time for politics, but I think what is playing out is that his opponent in the presidential election, former President Donald Trump, before court today, did say that they did a good job at both Columbia and UCLA, meaning the police department, and blaming the radical left, quote, lunatics. We can't let the radical left morons take over, was the quote that he gave reporters from in front. So clearly this is going to be a political issue and something potentially at the forefront of the presidential campaign.
Absolutely, and especially in a swing state like Michigan that has a large Arab American community. We want to go back to John Baird from KNX, who was there this morning on the campus of UCLA when police and protesters clashed. So this is video he took.
Police are moving in a line, and I'm right in the middle, and I want to get out of here. They are, we got zip ties. Boy, I'll tell you what. Police mean business setting off a flashbang and moving toward these people.
All right, that video was taken just shy of 3 o'clock this morning, when you can see the police there are doing what they call a kettle, where they slowly try pushing those demonstrators into a smaller section and get them to disperse. But those were the images that we saw. And for a better look at where this happened on the UCLA campus, let's go to Mark Liu at the desk.
Yeah, that's right, Jamie and Rudabeh. This all started, you saw, with that video from John Baird of 3, possibly 4 agencies all working together: the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, the CHP, the LAPD, and UCLA's own security force. I want to give you an idea of where and how this happened on the UCLA campus. If you come out to my screen, I'm going to show you. This here is the campus of UCLA, and we're going to focus on this area that I've highlighted called Royce Quad. This is where that encampment has been for about a week. It's right here, and this is where the police focused their efforts. This morning they started in a staging area just to the east and moved in this way in order to dismantle that encampment. Now, a lot of the protesters went down these steps. They're called the Jantz Steps. But as this encampment was dismantled, they walked the protesters back to the east and then north up to this area here. This was their staging area right in front of this large building here. That's called Bunch Hall. Now, ironically, that is where though a lot of political science classes are taken. So all of these protesters, they were detained right in this area. Now, at about 7 o'clock, we heard that there were many protesters that were likely coming from the residence halls, and they were approaching this line right here. This is where CHP and LA Sheriff's Department had a line to stop people from entering that area. That's where Cara Finstrom here saw that engagement. Everyone was taken onto buses here onto Charles E. Young Drive. 3 buses filled with detainees now on their way to various processing centers in order to be charged with misdemeanor, failure to disperse, and resisting arrest. That is the very latest here from the desk. I'll send it back to you.
Okay, Mark, thank you. And of course, we are keeping a close eye on these protests. But for now, we have the latest on our website, kcalnews.com. We are also streaming 24/7 on CBS News Los Angeles. In the meantime, you want to get to work and check the weather today? Let's head over to Kalina for a check on our roads.
Hi, good morning. So one of our biggest problems in LA right now is the Sigler, and it's been here for a while. It will be here for the next 20 minutes. It's that dirt spill that we've been watching for you. It's the 105 West before Crenshaw. 3 right lanes are blocked off, and just that small little 4-mile stretch will take you 36 minutes to get through. That's between Central to Crenshaw. So if you would like to take an alternate route, you can. However, the 405 is one of them, and that's also pretty busy. Orange County, we have this crash southbound 405 past Warner. 3 left lanes are blocked off there, and also a crash on the 55 south at 4th. Middle lane is off limits. All right, Paul, happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, May Gray, round number 2 on day number 2 of May. We're looking live outside and seeing the clouds in Santa Monica. Sunshine is coming, but not yet. We're also looking at cloud cover, looking down on the clouds from Mount Wilson. The cloud deck is still pretty robust and will be for the next hour or so. Here's the picture from space. Much of metro LA County, Orange County, about half of the Inland Empire is covered in clouds. Western LA County, including the western half of the San Fernando Valley, west of the 405, you have some sunshine. All of us get sunshine later on today. Downtown Los Angeles, it is currently 62 degrees. Your next weather headlines, it's another gray start, but it will be a sunny finish mid-morning onward. We should be mostly sunny. That's 6 pleasant sunny afternoons in a row. That streak is going to end this weekend. It's going to be much cooler and much cloudier. These are your highs today. Pasadena 75. Burbank 75, afternoon sunshine. Antelope Valley warms up to 83, including Palmdale's 83 degrees. Riverside back to 82. Cooler in Orange County, Fullerton 74. Cooler also in Camarillo with a high of 71. Here's your extended forecast. Afternoon sunshine today and tomorrow. Notice the 2 coolest days and cloudiest days, we're back to this again, are Saturday and Sunday. Sunday especially is going to be breezy. It's going to feel kind of brisk out there with a high of only 67. Valleys will drop from the 80s today to the 60s this weekend. Back to you.
All right, Paul, thank you. Our breaking news coverage of the UCLA protests and arrests continues in just a couple minutes. We'll be right back.
KCAL News Mornings.
Officers in riot gear moved in before dawn to break up the protest camp at UCLA. Protesters refusing to leave were arrested, and it led to disorder.
We have team coverage of reporters live from the campus this morning. Tina Patel, Rick Montanez, and Kara Finstrom have been at the scene since this all started this morning. They will tell us what they're seeing and learning as well.
Good morning. You are watching KCAL News Mornings at 9. Today is...
It's May 2nd.
Thursday, May 2nd.
Yes.
I'm Ruta Bae-Shabazi.
It seems like it's 2028 at this point after this morning, but that's okay. I'm Jamie Yukas. Thanks for joining us. It's been a tense morning with so much to cover on the campus protest. So we want to go live to UCLA in just a minute. But first, we have Paul Diano and Kalina Strinos here to bring you next weather and traffic. Two very important things for people trying to get to work.
And you wake up this morning and go outside and you're like, wow, sunshine's gone, another day of May gray. But just like yesterday, you go outside at 11 o'clock, it's like a whole different, it feels like a different climate.
Just be patient.
Yes, if you're patient for like 2
What's
hours,
that?
that's all we need. Yeah, patience is a virtue. We look live outside and show you what's going on right now. We have lots of cloud cover out there. And it's going to be around for the foreseeable future, next hour or two. But if you're heading out for lunch, it's not going to look anything like this. We will get the cloud cover burned off in short order. Los Angeles, still cloudy right now, 62 degrees. The visible satellite snapshot shows that we're mired in the cloud cover, all of our inland valleys, much of metro LA County, Orange County, Inland Empire. But we're beginning right there, just north of San Bernardino and Rancho Cucamonga, to see the clouds burn off, and they will clear from inland to the coast today. Ventura County, your clouds have already cleared. Temperature profile for downtown Los Angeles today. Gray right now, sunny by lunchtime, beautiful this afternoon. High temperatures will be in the mid-70s for a 6th consecutive day. Beaches will be cooler, partly sunny skies there, 69 degrees. Inland Empire and our valleys, 80s today again. High desert, 83 degrees and sunny. LA, Orange County metro area, 74 degrees with afternoon sunshine. It's not going to be nearly this warm or nearly this sunny this weekend. Not a washout, but some pretty significant changes are heading our way. We'll detail those coming up in a few. Right now, let's take a look at the roads with Kalina. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. So I still have this SIG alert here on the 105. It is westbound just before Crenshaw. It's that dirt spill that's been here for a while. It should be wrapping up right at this moment, but 3 right lanes are still blocked off, and you can still see that backup. It's about an hour and 4 minutes just to go this 4-mile stretch. So if you can opt for an alternate route, the 405 is one of them, but a heads up, you do get slow once you get to that 105. The crash in Orange County, though, cleared southbound 405 past Warner. Lanes now open. The backup, though, 43 minutes between Westminster to Warner. And then we also have this crash southbound 55 at 4th. That middle lane is off limits. That delay starts building off the 91. This morning out in the Inland Empire, we do have a stalled SUV 10 west at 4th. Middle lane block. That backup there leading the 15. And finally, some good news. That crash cleared 215 south right at the southbound 15 lanes now open. Ruta Bae, back to you.
Kalina, thank you. We have breaking